Hey guy, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope you all are doing great. And yeah, this is the next part of Systematic Shinobi. The next morning, Daiki, as usual, found himself in training ground 69. After finishing through his initial workout and healing himself up with the mystical palm jutsu, getting them gains instantly, he got around to the next part of his training. Ninjutsu. Usually, for the last little while, he'd been working on his lightning chakra generation and manipulation. But, he'd put that on hold yesterday, for a little bit. Because he finally had the excuse he needed, to work on a jutsu that would for sure make his training, at least in the learning sense of things, go much faster. Taking a deep breath and focusing, Daiki crossed his fingers in a familiar hand seal. It was a bit odd, it wasn't one of the normal 12 hand seals, at best, it could pass for a modified ox seal. But, it did help him focus on the physical aspect of his chakra more. Which on of itself, was interesting, and made a lot of sense. Shadow Clone Jutsu. He declared. He felt chunk of his chakra be expended as he focused on the technique. But, not half. There was a puff of smoke and an identical copy of himself appeared at his side. Yet, there were glaring discrepancies. For example, his clone was pale, and sweaty, looking ill. You got the ratio wrong again. The clone said haggardly. I know. Daiki sighed, and cancelled the technique. The clone disappeared in a chunk of smoke, and he felt the chakra used to create it, return to him. Or rather, about 3/4 of it. He was beginning to see why this technique was a lesser form of a kinjutsu, a forbidden technique. Getting the ratio down was actually quite tough. On top of that, doing it wrong, meant much of the chakra used would go to waste, leaving the clone formed wrong, and ensure the user got less chakra back upon the clone being dispelled. With that failure, he'd lost roughly 1/13 of his total chakra capacity. Which might not seem like a lot, but it was, when it only gave him so little chances to get the technique down before he had to rest and recover his chakra again. Still, that was a better attempt than the last few, before he'd given up last night and returned home to rest. And he was learning a lot through trial and error. For instance, he initially thought that clones would have the same chakra capacity as him, lower chakra to begin with, but more or less, like a half-empty tank. Basically, like one could put their hand in, and feel space that wasn't filled with water or whatever. Maybe a bucket would have been a better analogy. Either way, that was not the case. The clone was a complete copy of him, right down to the chakra. The thing was though, the clone's tank, while a perfect copy for the most part, was a fraction of the size. Meaning, a shadow clone of him would never have the same max chakra output that he did. Especially since his chakra coils would refill while the clones were still active. Hell, the clones could apparently regenerate chakra as well, just like him. Shadow Clone Jutsu was so fucking busted, without even getting into the memory transfer aspect of things. Bringing his hands together again, Daiki was about to attempt the jutsu once more, before he frowned and paused. He could feel someone coming. He might not be a sense ninja, but his general senses weren't bad either. He looked over his shoulder, just as a familiar high-collared, dark-haired Uchiha made his way into the training ground. Sasuke eyed the training ground idly for a moment, before making his way over to Daiki. Your training ground is a chore to get to. He grunted. Exactly why I picked it. I don't have a family compound to train in, so people don't disturb me. Daiki retorted, turning around to face the boy. Sasuke pursed his lips, before nodded, Sound logic, he replied. I imagine two idiots not bothering you constantly also helps with training. Wish I could say the same. You're not wrong, Daiki agreed. Honestly, as big a help a Jonin sensei would be to my training, having to have those two former teammates of mine along as well, would make my progress slower than it is now. I'm sure, I'm better off really. Hell, not getting a Jonin sensei leading to his current situation, was probably the best thing that ever happened to him. It's easy to see, with how much stronger you've gotten. Sasuke nodded. Wish I could say the same. Well, Naruto's not dead weight at least, unlike Amy and Suzuki were, they were pathetic. Daiki pointed out. Sasuke snorted. I notice you didn't mention Sakura not being dead weight. He responded. That was because he couldn't. Sakura had talent, for sure, but she didn't apply it, and without Tsunade personally training her, she really had no right being on a team with Sasuke and Naruto. They were absolute monsters in the making without even taking into account Ashura and Indra. Well, she's good eye candy at least, he settled on replying with, hiding a wince, and she'd drop to her knees for you at a word. I'm almost jealous. Sasuke raised an eyebrow at him, before scoffing, and have her think we're fated to be together forever or some other girlish fantasy nonsense. There was pure derision in his voice. No thank you. She already gets in the way of me getting stronger enough. I don't need her getting any other crazy ideas. You want to fuck Sakura? Feel free. Hell, I'll wish you luck. Maybe then she'll stop bothering me about this dating tripe. Well. He knew Sasuke wasn't a fan of Sakura early on, but he didn't think he'd full-on express his, more or less blessing for another dude to fuck her just to keep her away from him. You know, you never expressed interest in any other girls at the academy, Daiki hummed. You realize, you're gonna need to bang some girls to revive your clan, right? Women, not girls. Sasuke surprised him by correcting him promptly. Weak, useless deadweight. I have no interest in them being the mother of my children and the future matriarch of my clan. Besides, that goal is secondary, and something that can be taken away at any moment, unless I accomplish my main goal. Killing your brother. Daiki nodded in understanding. Yes, Sasuke hissed, his onyx eyes flashing red briefly. You're a lot smarter than my teammates. Beyond Kakashi, those other two have no idea what I'm after. Daiki shrugged. Naruto can't understand it. He'd try, but he won't be able to understand it, because he hasn't experienced anything like that, he reasoned, and Sakura has deluded herself into believing she's in love with you, when she knows jack all about you. A brief chuckle left Sasuke. Funny, you sound like you do though. He pointed out. A bit, he nodded in response. I'm an orphan. But I did know my parents for a little while, or at least my mother. My father was killed by the Kyuubi during its attack, and my mother was eaten away by its corrosive chakra for a few years before dying. I suppose you can understand a bit then, Sasuke agreed, though, you at least have the solace of knowing the one who murdered your family is dead and gone now. Daiki chuckled. You'd think so, huh? He hummed, but said nothing else on the matter. It was funny, before he basically became a fusion of two people, he originally despised the Kyuubi, hating it for making him live life of an orphan. But, perspective really was key. And he found he couldn't hate Kurama. Not only was he mind-controlled into the attack, he'd been sealed away, for nearly an entire century, used and abused by humans. He couldn't blame the fox for attacking humans on sight and trying to kill them when the Sharingan hypnosis was broken. They lapsed into a silence that hung in the air. It was only broken by Sasuke giving a cough and reaching into his pocket, withdrawing a small scroll. Here, by the way, as we agreed on. The boy handed it over to him. I've written down all the instructions you'll need to learn the fireball jutsu. Oh, right, thanks. Daiki blinked, accepting it, before looking Sasuke in the eye. You're a lot more civil than you were yesterday. Sasuke smirked. You proved you were worth my time, he responded simply. You're strong. Daiki grinned proudly, and getting stronger and stronger every damn day. He agreed. Next time, I'll win. Sasuke vowed. We'll see. Daiki actually found he was quite eager for another spar with him. By the way, on the matter of Sakura, while I wouldn't mind a tumble with her, she's way too high maintenance for my liking. You can keep her. How generous of you, the dark-haired Uchiha replied, voice dry and rolling his eyes. Well, maybe pigs will learn to fly and I'll be able to foist her off on Naruto, along with that Yamanaka annoyance. Unlikely, but I can dream. Snorting, the Uchiha gave him a nod, bidding him goodbye, and walked away, leaving Daiki behind. He watched his fellow Genin leave, eyes fixated on his back. Did I just become friends with that guy? He wondered. Yes. Daiki's voice echoed throughout training grounds 69 the very next day. It had taken a few days, quite a bit longer than Naruto to get it down, but he'd done it, with only a fraction of the chakra the blonde Jinchuriki had at his disposal. How do you feel? He asked the perfect clone of himself standing at his side. About the same, his clone shrugged. Beyond the chakra, which is obvious, I don't feel any different. Daiki nodded. What about the system? He asked next. That's there too. His clone confirmed, though the chakra capacity is reduced on mine. Interestingly, he couldn't see the system the clone could see. He'd tried showing the system off to a random civilian, and they couldn't see it either. In that way, it meant the system was somehow linked to his individual mind then. All right, two left. Daiki pushed on. He'd dwell more on those thoughts later. Can you access the sealed equipment? When one created a clone, any equipment they had on them was generally cloned as well. Since the seal was tattooed directly into his skin, it made him wonder if there was a puff of smoke that emanated from his clone's hand, and within it, grasped in his palm, was the white hilt of a familiar Kumomake ninjato. The weapon of that missing nin he killed nearly a month ago. What was his name again? Kijiro or something. It was kind of surreal how easily he could forget the name of a man he murdered, decapitated and then handed over his head for cash. Well, guess that answers that then. Daiki blinked. That would be incredibly useful in the future. Only one left then. His clone agreed, before erupting into smoke as he dispelled himself. As soon as the clone was gone, a rush of memories swept through Daiki's head, all from the perspective of his clone. He could see in his mind's eyes, the status screen from another perspective, the halved chakra capacity, the feel of the ninjato in his palm. It was actually a bit disorienting. I shouldn't abuse this too much right now, and recycle the clones every hour or so at most. He mused. He had to remember, he didn't have an innate Jinchuriki /Uzumaki combo healing factor, or anything even close to that. Yet. I can work with that. He grinned, bringing his fingers into the cross-shaped hand seal once again and shouting, Shadow Clone Jutsu. Time to get down to the grind, right and proper, time to crinkle those leaves. Daiki sighed, the sizzling of cooking meat sounding in his ears as he leaned back against the comfortable seating behind him. It was soft and comfortable. A balm for his aching muscles. For the most part, after training, he could heal his muscles right up to top shape, more or less, gaining instant muscle increases. His muscles still felt the fatigue though, and through constant punishment, phantom rips in the muscles themselves. He had to admit, the seating inside the booths of Yakiniku felt absolutely heavenly compared to his piece of shit couch. I should look into getting enough cash to move to a better place, or at least get better furniture, he mused to himself. That would involve going on more missions to raise the money though. And, well, he was kind of super busy training himself into the dirt so he didn't become a statistic when Orochimaru decided he wanted to invade because he was still baby raging over the fact Minato got picked over him to be Hokage. Oh well, it was kind of working for him, if his status screen was anything to go by. Name, Daikiyuria. Age, 13. Chakra capacity, 18,900/18,900, Chunin. Strength, 69/500. Endurance, 102/500. Durability, 69/500. Agility, 69/500. Taijutsu, 145/500. Ninjutsu, 165/500. Genjutsu, 10/500. Bukajutsu, 40/500. Chakra control, 180/500. Chakra affinities. Lightning, adept, you have stepped onto the path of roaring thunder. Fuinjutsu, adept, you are no longer a mere amateur. He was looking damn fine now. Everything seemed to just balloon upwards now that he had clones he could spar with, especially his Bukajutsu and Taijutsu. Since he could use multiple styles to fight, and so could his clones, they could mix and batch, get experience fighting in all different ways. Funny though, that his ninjutsu had blown right past his taijutsu, after he'd managed to finally crinkle the shit out of that damn leaf. Honestly, after that, getting the fireball jutsu down had been easy street. In total he'd worked on his lightning chakra for a month, 2, or more even technically when including clones into his training, which made his chakra capacity grow massively in the process as well. He mentally thanked Kakashi for this training method. God, it was helpful. Actually, could I send a clone off to do D ranks for me every single day, he wondered. That shouldn't be too much of a problem, and he could accumulate missions for his record and earn money every day while he was at it. As it was, he'd learned pretty much everything he had access to right now, beyond the Rasengan, but he wasn't sure he wanted to touch that for the time being. Maybe it would be best to give a little time on it to make it seem more natural. If he just barraged Hiruzen and such with the news of all this shit he was coming across or recreating, it would look too good to be true. And definitely seem suspicious, even though no spy would ever be so blatant as to wave that shit in front of people's faces. It would just lead to awkward questions he didn't want to answer though. He definitely needed to work on that genjutsu score, somehow. Maybe go see Iruka-sensei. He knew he had learned a few genjutsu, the man had used them to test his class now and then after all, and one of the tests to obtain his headband had been breaking out of Iruka's hell viewing technique. The grind never ends. Daiki chuckled under his breath, putting it out of mind as he grabbed the tongs that had been provided to him and flipped over the meat atop the barbecue within his booth. While he waited, he flared chakra through his palm, and in a puff of smoke, a map appeared in front of him. He repeated the motion, and a pencil appeared as well. God, his Dimension 4 seal was so fucking convenient. No having to reach for scrolls or anything like that, just a thought and he was holding what he wanted. Truly, the best jutsu ever. What is with that place, honestly? He rolled his eyes as he focused on a specific part of the map. He'd been taking the time to triangulate where Isabu, the three-tailed Baijua should be right now. And he was pretty sure he knew where it was. The huge lake Isabu was between Fire Country and Tea Country for sure, since Kabuto took a boat to reach the area. Which wouldn't make sense for anywhere else, especially because Tea Country was to the south of Fire Country, and lead out into the open ocean according to the map. The problem was, there were no large water surfaces between Fire Country and Tea Country. But, if one took a boat across the Hungary Gulf, part of the ocean that swept into a junction in between Wind Country, Fire Country and Tea Country, they would find themselves in the land of rivers. A small country, named as such, because of the massive lake, or river that used to be connected to the ocean before a fight Hashirama Senju was a part of rearranged the map and created a land mass that cut it off. A place that was less than 20 miles away from where he met Shiromurai, and not even a day's journey from the Katabami gold mine, where Reiga Kurosaki was. River country sure is rife with treasure. Daki snorted to himself. But yes, he was sure that was where Isabu was. Now he only needed to get stronger, copy and learn how Naruto's seal worked, or at least half of it, and somehow convince the three-tailed Baijua to willingly join up with him and let him become its Jinchuriki, then somehow explain that off without it sounding like complete bullshit to everyone around him. Maybe he could spin a tale involving Reiga and Ranmaru, take care of 3 daimyo with 1 shuriken and all that. Before he could think any further on it, a loud voice broke him from his thoughts, "Meat is youth." Daki blinked slowly. Indeed, one must partake in plenty of meat and facilitate their protein intake. A younger, male voice agreed, "Meat is indeed youthful. Can't you guys be quiet for one day?" A soft female voice groused in annoyance, "The patron already told us, there's no booths left, let's just go somewhere else, you're disturbing the other customers." "Nonsense, Tenten," the first voice harumphed, "I'm sure some will be amenable to sharing space with us." And as the voice finished, a head full of shiny black, bowl-cut shaped hair peeked over the barrier hiding the booth Daki was in, and a blinding grin shone towards him. "Why hello there, my young youthful friend." Mato Guy greeted him boisterously, "I see that you are alone in this booth. Might it perhaps be okay for I and my youthful students to join you and partake in youthful tasty meal together?" "Huh?" Daki blinked slowly, before shrugging, "Sure, I don't see why not, I've got plenty of space." He gestured to the other side of the booth, enough for 4 people to sit comfortably, with nary a soul. He wasn't going to say no to the chance to get to know them. How youthful. Guy flashed him a thumbs up, before turning and saying something to his team and gesturing to them to follow him. A moment later, he bore witness to a robust, muscular and tall bow-haired man in a green leotard, followed by his Minami, and a long-haired, white-eyed pretty boy sitting opposite him. While the seating at his side shifted as the last member of their name sat next to him. "Sorry about them." Tenten apologized with a sheepish smile, cheeks flushed and rubbing the nape of her neck in embarrassment. "Don't worry about it," he waved her apology off, "I had plenty of space as you can see." Looking at her, he had to admit, Tenten was quite the looker. A pretty, creamy-skinned face, warm chocolate brown eyes, a cute delicate-looking nose, a graceful neck, and a quick glance from the corner of his eyes, seeing the way the front of her sleeveless pink shirt stretched out at the front, told him that she was far more curvaceous than Sakura. He was actually surprised. He thought Tenten was more the slender type, but she was actually kind of stacked. "A pleasure to meet you, friend." Guy's Minami thrust out a thumbs up at him, drawing him from saying anything else to the pretty bun-haired girl at his side. "I am Konoha's beautiful green beast, Rock Lee." He flashed a massive grin at him, and for a moment, Daiki was sure he heard an audible ping come from them. Daiki. He introduced himself, rather blankly. Seeing it on a screen was one thing, but it in no way prepared him for the sheer exuberance of the older boy. That's the way Lee, socializing is youth. Guy cheered, before flashing a thumbs up at Daiki just like his student, and I am Konoha's sublime green beast, Mato Guy. Daiki blinked at him, before looking at the long-haired Neji who seemed to be doing his very best to ignore his teammate's very existence. Are you also some kind of beast of Konoha? The look Neji gave him in return, one would think he'd insulted his dead parents, ancestry and everything else he took pride in. No, I am not. He replied simply, before grunting out his name and looking away to stare out of the window and probably imagine the other occupants of the booth out of existence. A groan of dismay came from Tenten. This is why no other teams want to hang out with us anymore, she whined. She shook her head and forced a brittle smile on her face. I'm Tenten. She introduced herself. You have it rough, huh? Daiki pointed out, kinda glad I don't have teammates now. Well, there was no now about it, he'd been thanking his lucky stars since he talked to Sajuke about it. You have no idea. Tenten groaned. He resisted the urge to pat her on the back sympathetically. A part of the Genin core, I assume, then youthful Daiki. Guy hummed, making him look over to the man. How is it treating you? You look like a strong lad, I can't imagine you not doing well. Pretty well, there's a lot more freedom in it I've figured out recently than having a Jonin sensei, he shrugged. I don't really have anyone to teach me, but hard work and guts are carrying me along pretty well regardless. Silence. The whole booth went silent for a good 5 seconds and Daiki felt himself get a bit uncomfortable as Guy and Lee just kind of stared at him. And then, they exploded. Oh my goodness. Guy wept, great big tears. Daiki-kun, you are so youthful. Lee joined him. And then they began hugging each other, and crying together. He turned to Tenten, correction, you have it really rough. Tenten whimpered. Thankfully, after that, Guy and Lee seemed to quiet down, and while Guy ordered food for his team, discussion naturally shifted to the big shiny red coinkydink, or rather coincidence they all had in common. Being ninja. Lee asked what sort of shinobi he was, and at first Daiki wasn't really sure how to answer, before settling on claiming to be a general shinobi, with leanings towards ninjutsu and taijutsu. He got especially hyped about the taijutsu and invited Daiki to come meet him at Training Ground 9 anytime and they could spar. Guy jumped in and happily agreed to even give Daiki some tips if he did. It was definitely something to keep in mind. Tenten asked him what kind of jutsu he knew, and he rattled of a few, mentioning the mystical palm though, had her giving him an odd look, before changing the subject to ask about missions. Really, they had a lot of interesting missions to talk about, even completing a B-rank mission together at one point apparently. The most he had to share really, was his last mission. It did seem to get a bit of attention from Neji though when he revealed he'd killed and claimed the bounty of a Kumo ninja, even got a slight nod of respect out of the frigid Hyuga prodigy. Time seemed to fly in, and before he knew it, he had eaten his food, ordered more, and finished that up, and Team 9 were right there with him. He actually didn't even need to pay. Guy happily footed the bill for being kind enough to let them join him in his booth, before rushing off with Lee, both running on their hands through the streets of Konoha. Neji said nothing as he left, leaving him alone with Tenten. Please don't tell me you're actually going to wear that. Tenten grimaced beside him, pointing at the gift Guy had left him with the profound tip of, stay youthful. A green leotard that he held in his hand. What, don't think I could pull it off? He grinned at her. I don't even assume that Summer could pull that off. Tenten gagged. Oh, he begged to differ, especially with how skin-tight it was. Think so? Daki raised an eyebrow at her. I think you could pull it pretty well actually. After all, now that they were out of the booth, he could get a good look at her, good and proper like, and he had to admit, he was not wrong. Tenten was pretty tall for a girl, with long, tongued legs, and green baggy pants she wore, were stretched out deliciously at the back. Tenten had it going on for sure. Her cheeks flushed a little bit. Stop. She giggled a bit, punching him lightly on the arm. Seemed she wasn't all that used to boys flirting with her. Kind of expected, with how much time she spent training and being a tomboy, but still, good to know. All right, he held up his hands in surrender. So, what's up? Daki asked, getting to the root of the issue. There had to have been a reason she hung around, instead of leaving with her teammates, right? She winced. I don't really like asking this, but I've hit a brick wall. The pretty older girl began. Can you help me with the mystical palm jutsu? Oh, that was all. Sure. Daki agreed. Not only would it get him in good with not only a fellow Konoha ninja, and a pretty older female one at that, but Guy was nice enough to offer him some tips and to come to him for advice if he needed it even, so he saw no reason why he shouldn't help his student out in turn. Plus, beyond all that, he kind of liked Tenten. He'd come to see she had quite the sarcastic personality and dry personality to her. That was easy. Tenten froze, surprised. Should it have been though? We hit it off with pretty well, right? He pointed out. Anyway, you can generally find me in Training Ground 69 when I'm not busy with missions or the like. Oh, okay. Tenten began responding before freezing and giving him a deadpan look. Why do I feel like you chose that specific number of Training Ground just for the number alone? His lips twitched into a switch. Because you've got brains to go with that beauty. He winked. Her face flushed a deep red, and he laughed, bidding her goodbye and continuing on. He had more training to do after all. The grind never ended. Are you sure this is a good idea? Kakashi looked up from his book to meet the Sundame Hokage's eyes. I mean, Sasuke's fine, but Sakura has no filter when she's around him and Naruto's still far too rash. They aren't really a team that's suited for escorting a high-class VIP. It's a B rank in name only. Hiruzen puffed on his pipe. It's only that high even because of who you're escorting. The chance of combat is drastically low, and it's less than a day's travel from here. And it will look good for your team's mission record when the chance comes to be promoted. It's rather silly, so, is it not? Kakashi directed his face to the mission scroll sitting on the Hokage's deck, displaying the picture of the client. Who ever heard of the leader of a hidden village having to pay another village to escort them? Waterfall sadly has precious few shinobi these days, and young Shibuki lacks the disposition needed. The Hokage shook his head. Quite a waste really. The boy is incredibly talented. Perhaps he could even have been a match for you given a few years if not for being afraid of his shadow. Perhaps. Kakashi shrugged lightly. Though, I have a feeling there's a specific shinobi, or rather kunoichi you want me to check in on while I'm there. He eyed the older man knowingly. Well, I wouldn't pick your team for this mission otherwise. The Genin act as a good smoke screen for you to sneak in. Hiruzen chortled lightly. He was just making sure young ninja got some props for their part in it. He reached into his robe, and pulled out a scroll, unrolling it across his desk. Her name is Fu, no last name, an orphan from what we have been able to uncover. She is 16 years old, general strength below that of your typical Chunin. Waterfall has few capable of teaching her. After all, she is the current container of the Shinobi, the seven-tailed horn beetle. Depicted on the scroll was a young teenage girl. She had tan skin, with short mint green hair and striking bright orange eyes. And you just want me to check on her? Kakashi asked. That's all, just get me a general personality profile and check how she's treated by her village. Hiruzen confirmed with a nod. Waterfall is not known for their sealing prowess. We have to know if she is liable to lose control and unleash the beast. While not as powerful as the Kyuubi, not even close, it is still the third most powerful of the tailed beasts, and with the ability to fly freely through the air, it is a terrible foe to deal with and could devastate the countryside before we can stop it. Kakashi grimaced. Yes, he could understand exactly how big a threat that would be. All right, I'll get it done, the copy ninja promised. Splendid. Hiruzen grinned, before pausing for a moment. Actually, a young Genin has caught my eye lately, part of the Genin Corps. He's training very hard to make up for that. Would you be fine taking him along? A B rank on his record will go a long way to allowing him to compete in the Chunin exams. From the Genin Corps, huh? Kakashi hummed with interest. The next morning, Deki made his way to his ever-homey training ground a bit earlier than usual. The sun even had only shone the barest hints of beginning to rise, and that was only because it was summer. Not that it would be like that much longer, they were already at the tail end of summer, mind you. Still, there was a whistle on his lips and spring in his step as he jauntily swaggered his way through the paths between the training grounds towards his destination. He was in a good mood, for sure. And why wouldn't he be? His abilities were looking sweet as shit. He had an Uchiha who plopped his ass in his training ground every now and then to challenge him to spars, and even now would have a cute older girl coming to him for assistance and letting him endear himself to her. And on top of all that, he had a rough plan of action for the future. Really, everything was coming up Deki. This was the age of the Great Deki. Abruptly, the Great Deki paused just outside of Training Ground 7 and instead, a somewhat short girl, just around 5 feet tall, stood hiding behind a tree. Short, midnight blue hair, and porcelain skin, dressed in a large, baggy white jacket and a pair of dark blue Shinobi pants. Hinata Hyuga was peering around a tree, stealthily, bending out just a bit to look into the training ground. Well, at the very least, he could see for himself, that like the tree she was hiding behind, with her bent over like that, he could see Hinata had quite the trunk of her own. Why the hell doesn't she just use her Bakugan, he couldn't help but wonder. This was precious time in which she could be training. She could at least be training her Daojutsu and expending chakra constantly to increase her capacity if she was going to waste time spying on Naruto. Truly a plebeian to the great grind set. Honestly, watching her waste her time like that, made his skin crawl a bit. She was a damn kunoichi for crying out loud. How long had she even been there? He couldn't believe how wasteful that was. Why come to the training grounds, this early, just to spy on a crush, yet never even approach them? If she was at least using her Bakugan to do it, he could let it slide, because, at least some gains would be getting made. Hinata was almost as much of a disappointment in the ninja arts as Sakura and Ino, only wasn't, because she had superior training than them from her clan. But considering Hinata was the oldest of his graduating class, well, the disappointment only grew. Come to think of it, besides Deki himself, Naruto was the youngest of their graduating class. Did that make Hinata an ARA type? Probably not. She had the body for it, and the background, but she lacked the mindset. Silly Hinata, if she worked up the nerve and ARAD Naruto, he would have been eating out of the palm of her hand. Speaking of Naruto, Daiki was curious as to what kind of grind the boy was up to. He made his way over to Hinata, light on his feet, and she didn't even notice him coming. Truly, she wasted her Daojutsu. He stopped behind her and peeked over her head into the training ground. Yep, there was Naruto. He had divested his usual orange jacket, leaving him in just his orange pants, sandals and mesh shirt. And was currently in the process of push-ups, his face caked in sweat, and a small puddle having formed beneath him. And off to the side, he could see all three of the training posts typical of one of the Konoha training grounds. Daiki nodded in approval. It was suboptimal of a grind, but he was grinding away for sure. And he supposed with his innate healing factor, being an Uzumaki and Jinchuriki, he was gaining mightily regardless of how poorly his grind was. So, stalking Naruto again, Hinata. Daiki pulled his head back around the tree and asked from behind her. Hinata gave a small startled leap and whirled around, face flushing a bright red. Daiki-san. She stuttered. I am indeed Daiki, he agreed with a nod. Why not go just talk to him instead of wasting time like this? He got straight to the point of the issue. Hinata just stared at him for a moment before swallowing heavily. I can't. You're never gonna get him if you act like this. He couldn't help but roll his eyes. Naruto ended up with plenty of girls after him, even what amounted to the leader of an entire country wanting him to impregnate her. Nice going Naruto, he couldn't help but mentally praise the future Naruto. The current Naruto was thoughtless and ignorant, but he'd grow into himself well for sure. What do you mean? Hinata asked shyly, poking her fingers together. You know what I mean, let's not jump around the issue. He rolled his eyes, and as you are right now, you aren't right for him either. What she wanted wasn't a role she could fulfill. She didn't have the strength or mental fortitude to be a partner for Naruto and support him. Fucking hell, she couldn't approach him for a conversation. A hurt expression flashed on her face. I see. Hinata looked down. His chest stung at the expression, and how defeated she looked. And he realized what situation he was in right now. He just kind of approached a lone girl, who was watching over the target of her affections and started lambasting her. Now he just felt bad, since she really was just a genuinely nice girl. Thankfully, he could fix that. Hinata yelped as he wrapped an arm around her waist and heaved her up into the air and over his shoulder. Despite that dump truck she had on her, she was light as a feather. And with her pressed up against him like this, he could get a feel for her chest. She was just as stacked as Tenten, maybe a bit more actually. She would come across as even more voluptuous, he supposed, since she was that much shorter than Tenten. What are you doing, Daiki-san? Hinata spluttered. Turning on his heel, Daiki resumed his trek towards the ever-welcoming training ground 69. I felt bad with how sad you looked, he shrugged, so, I'll help you out. You want to be closer to Naruto, right? I can make that happen. Why, you can? Any hesitancy in her left and she gaped at him, white eyes wide, but he heard the hopefulness in her voice. She swallowed quickly and shook her head. You don't need to do that. He ignored what she said. What time do you usually meet your team? He asked instead. 9. Hinata replied. Plenty enough time, it was only just after 5 in the morning right now. Good enough, he nodded. Also, don't worry about feeling indebted or something or like I'm going out of my way. I'll be getting something out of this as well. You will. Hinata blinked. Damn right he would. There were two things he needed to do with her to help her achieve femme fatale ARA status. 1. Get her confident in her body and rid her of the shyness, something he already had an idea for. Secondly, was making Hinata get good. In the process, he would be able to spar against the gentle fist of the Hyuga clan, which would give him experience in the future with it, should he end up fighting Neji in the Chunin exams, and again, the more experience he got fighting, with the more variety of opponents, the more his skill stats tended to rise. So, he'd get gains and he would get free eye candy out of it, a win-win for him really. Two of her fingers lashed out, aiming for his shoulder, but were easily avoided. He stepped into her guard and Hinata's eyes widened as his knee flashed up. She tried to jump back, but he was too fast for her to retreat from, and could only bring one of her arms up to block it feebly. Her arm bone rattled from the force and Hinata grimaced as she was sent flying back through the air. She slammed into the ground hard on her back and lay there for a moment, panting deeply and staring up at the sun that had properly risen now. He was so strong. Daki-san is absolutely ruthless. She thought idly. Was he different back in the academy? She remembered he kept to himself mostly, but he fought tooth and nail during spars, though she couldn't remember him having this same edge to him. It wasn't really a bother, her father was rougher on her when he forced her to spar with him anyway. What am I even doing here? Hinata wondered. It had all happened so fast. Daki had found her watching over Naruto-kun, he'd caught on to her feelings, easily, as if they were as plain as day, hammered in that she wasn't good enough for Naruto-kun, a fact she already well knew, and then just dragged her off to train with him. That was 3 hours ago. For a full 2.5 hours, Daki had run through physical conditioning, and she'd noticed he was wearing weights of some kind. He'd made her join in as well, but not before making her take off her jacket, leaving her in just her mesh shirt, and forcing her to keep her Bakugan activated constantly. She'd only managed a fraction of the amount of exercises Daki did, and that was without weights. And then once he was done, he'd forced her to spar with him. And he'd thrown her around like a ragdoll. She felt less like a training partner and more like a punching bag really. He reminded her of Sasuke Uchiha, with how intense he was during sparring, and a lot of Naruto-kun, with how he threw himself into his training. She couldn't measure up to him at all. She was a failure after all. Still, she just had to keep trying, and not give up. She'd get there eventually, even with how untalented she was, right? A shadow was cast over her suddenly, and Daki's face stared down at her from above. He stared down into her eyes, before his gaze trailed down to her chest. On reflex, Hinata's arms came up to cover her chest. With how much she'd grown recently, her obscene breasts bulged out the front of her mesh armor quite plainly, and, with the way they stretched it out, if one looked closely, they would be able to see quite a lot of her chest through the mesh. Is this really necessary? Hinata couldn't help but ask, face flushing in embarrassment. She'd asked why he made her take off her jacket before and leaving her in just her mesh armor, but he'd just told her to do it and not question him, that it was needed. So far, all she knew was that she'd been jumping around a lot with the fat on her chest bouncing around noticeably. If only she were slender like Sakura-san, a proper cute girl, she wouldn't have this issue. The few times she'd seen Sakura-san in mesh armor alone, her chest didn't bulge the mesh out obscenely like her own chest did. Course it is. Daki shrugged with a grin, you're way too shy, it's kind of annoying actually. You need to be more comfortable in your body, so the best way is to show it off a bit, and sparring at the same time makes sure you're growing stronger while you do. Respect the grind, Hinata. He lifted his hand and waggled his finger at her, as if giving her a stern lecture. Well, it kind of made sense, she supposed. She admitted, if only to herself, she'd forgot her state of dress when the sparring began and had to put all her thoughts into making sure Daki didn't smash her into paste. Though, she still didn't understand fully what he meant by the grind. She assumed it had something to do with training, especially because he kept paraphrasing the words gains, which obviously was some form of slang for gaining more strength. Looks like you're done now though, he mused, and sat down beside her. Well, 3 hours of conditioning and sparring isn't bad. I doubt Sakura or Ino could last even a third as long as you, so good on you, I suppose. Yet, despite the fact that he was sweating quite noticeably, Daki looked like he was still raring to go, and that was while wearing those weights of his. Still, a small rush of pride ran through her at his light praise. It may have been petty of her, but she felt good at being praised, at being better at something than Sakura-san, the girl who held all of Naruto-kun's attention. Too bad, his plan would never work. He was missing one crucial thing that seemed to fly over his head in regards to her. I understand what you're trying to do. Hinata pushed herself up into a sitting position beside him, but it won't work. Pretty sure it will. He refuted confidently, without hesitation. How she wished she could have that same confidence he seemed to have. She envied that. She giggled lightly. It won't. She still had to insist. Thank you for trying, it does mean a lot, but you can't be confident in something that has no worth. My body isn't as attractive as Sakura-san's, so there's no way I can compete with her for Naruto-kun's affection. She had made her peace with that back in the academy. She knew she would never get Naruto-kun to herself, but she still couldn't resist watching over him training, never giving up and trying to emulate that. He inspired her to keep going. Still, it meant a lot that Daki was trying to help her regardless, even though he blatantly pointed out himself how impossible it was for her to achieve what she wanted. She looked him in the eye and mustered the best smile she could to thank him, only to see him looking at her blankly. What? He blinked, looking utterly confused. Is something wrong? Hinata asked, confused herself now. Yeah, what are you talking? He looked at her as if she was stupid. The shy thing's a turn off for sure, as is the baggy clothes you always wear, and you have hair not far from Sajuke's. You'd look way better with longer hair, but beyond that, you're hot as shit. Eh? Hinata's mind was suddenly quite empty as utter confusion swept all of her thoughts away, and she stared at the muscular, tan-skinned boy sitting beside her. Don't get me wrong, Sakura's pretty, love that hair of hers, and she has a nice ass, but she's a skinny waif. No guy wants a chick like that. Daki bluntly continued on, before gesturing to her. Maybe when she stops dieting like she likes to do all the time that'll change for the better, but as things are right now, your body is way better than Sakura's. Better ass, nice hips, exotic eyes, and a pair of tits that just don't quick. Hinata's mouth opened and closed, and she felt her face heat up to burning proportions at his crass words. I thought you were just shy in general and about how fast you're developing compared to the likes of her, but sheesh, to think your body is bad. Daki shook his head. Man, no idea where you got that idea from. You mean you weren't just trying to make me accept and get over the fact I'm unattractive? Hinata absently asked. Hell no, Daki snorted, before suddenly his eyes widened. Wait. Don't tell me you actually thought this because Naruto likes Sakura and based attractiveness on that. Why did it seem so silly when he said it like that? She couldn't trust her voice, so just nodded. Daiki laughed. Naruto isn't in love with Sakura, hell, he doesn't understand the concept, trust me on that. He's been alone for so long nobody's taught him the difference. He pushed on, he's literally trying to be friends with her, but doesn't know how to do it. No idea why he's fixated on her like that, but yeah, at best, he has a small crush on her, he's not in love with her or anything like that. Daiki, it seemed he knew a lot about Naruto-kun. She hadn't known any of that at all, despite all the time she'd watched him. I don't really know much about Naruto-kun. Hinata realized. She didn't know what hobbies he had outside of training, what he liked to beyond that even and more. It was sobering. She had to try harder. But, putting that thought aside right now, didn't Daiki's words mean she was more attractive than Sakura? I'm good looking? She asked, hesitantly, for confirmation. 6 out of 10, better than Sakura, who I'd rate 3 out of 10, though Daiki wasn't at all embarrassed to share his thoughts on her attractiveness. Grow your hair out, and don't try and cover up that rocking bod of yours, and get rid of some of that shyness, and you could easily hit a 9 out of 10, maybe even full on 10 out of 10 depending on how you go from there. Her cheeks felt like they would burst into flames at any moment, and she had to resist the urge to go grab her jacket and put it on when his eyes once again drifted to her chest. The fronts of her breasts were hidden by her arms, but he could still see the upper swells of her breasts and down into her cleavage. But all the same, she felt one side of her lips twitch up at his words, and something stir in her chest. It made her arms shake, yet was a good feeling that almost urged her to drop her arms and let him see fully. Nobody had ever so blatantly complimented her before, and expressed such a surefire belief in any of her potential. Longer hair, more stylish clothes, less shy, she chanted lightly to herself. That was all she needed to completely dwarf Sakura in attractiveness. A thought suddenly occurred as Daiki tore his eyes away from her chest and grinned in a way that made him suddenly seem very handsome. What did you mean you would get benefits yourself out of helping me? Isn't that obvious? He snorted, raising an eyebrow at her. For one, I get experience fighting against the gentle fist, it's good training, and secondly, I got to ogle you at the same time, 2 benefits at the same time. Gotta respect the grind, like I've been telling you, Hinata, get the most for your efforts. Despite how absurd this situation was, Hinata couldn't help but giggle again. I see, thank you, Daiki, you've taught me a lot. She smiled at him. Despite the crudeness of it all, she was very thankful for his upfront honesty with her, and what he said, and the way he acted. It put a lot into perspective for her, and made the world seem just a little bit more open to her. Like I told you, you don't need to thank me, he repeated himself from earlier. Pretty sure I'm the one who got the most out of this. His eyes dipped to her chest once more for a brief moment, a blatant obvious look, before he looked back up and winked at her. She could have stayed here and listened to him praise her for hours. It was like she was someone who had been lost in the desert for so long, had suddenly found a beautifully full oasis of crystal clear water to drink from. She could not though. It was almost time for her to meet her team. Is it okay if I join you again for training sometimes? Hinata asked before she left, as she stood up and retrieved her jacket. Fine with me, I'm generally here a lot of the time when I've not got something to do or have missions. Daiki shrugged. Feel free to hit me up anytime you want. Hinata gave him a wide smile, before bowing to him politely in thanks. It was only as she did, and saw him grinning, his eyes looking below her face, that she realized her large breasts were dangling quite noticeably from it. She may have stayed in that position for a few dozen more seconds than necessary before standing up, and pulling her jacket on, bidding the younger boy goodbye and walking away. Hinata almost tripped as a wolf whistle echoed from behind her, followed by Daki's voice cheering, "I hate to see you go, but I sure do love to watch you leave." His words confused her for a moment, until she looked over her shoulder to see him eyeing her retreating backside. She couldn't wipe the massive smile from her face as she made her way to meet her team, and there was a bit of spring in her step all the way. As soon as Hinata was out of sight, Daki stood up and stretched his arms out. "Well, that was interesting," he hummed to himself. There was a puff of smoke at his side, and all of a sudden Kakashi Hatake was by his side, making him jump, startled. "The heck are you doing?" Daki calmed his racing heart and growled in annoyance. He really needed to find a way to up his sensory abilities. "You're about as smooth as sandpaper, huh?" Kakashi replied with instead, snorting, "Don't you think you played it up a bit too much for the girl? This pervert was watching us." Daki resisted the urge to cringe. Maybe he forced himself to shrug, but hammering it in like that will help her in the long run, will make sure it's reinforced. Plus, it wasn't often one could be so blatant about checking out a good-looking girl. Still, to think she thought she was unattractive, he shook his head at the sheer absurdity of it. Hayashi had really killed any pride in that girl, huh? Well, hopefully that helped her out and she wasn't bad company on top of being nice to look at and useful for getting those gains into jutsu. Still, time to address the elephant in the room. "So why are you here?" he asked Kakashi, confused. "I've not made any more bets with Sasuke, but I won't say no to 2 more jutsu." Since he'd met Sasuke and gotten the fireball jutsu from him, the Uchiha had turned up to his training ground twice to spar, and he'd won both. He'd even more or less caught up to Sasuke in physical speed as well. Still, each spar was close as hell and the force palm jutsu was what kept him ahead of Sasuke. I'll think about it," Kakashi shrugged, which probably meant no, but whatever. "As for why I came to speak to you and heard your adorable little flirting and confidence-boosting conversation with the cute little Hyuga heiress, my team has a mission. The Hokage asked me to let you tag along." "What?" Daki asked, confused. "Why?" Kakashi shrugged again. "Apparently you caught the Hokage's eyes and he feels like it's a waste for you not to get a shot at the Chunin exams," the man explained boredly. "This mission is a B rank, in name only mind you, just a simple VIP escort mission. It will only take a day and will look good on your record." Oh. That made sense. He had stood out a little to the Hokage with his last mission and seemed to have shown a decent bit of potential with him getting the chameleon contract. He should get around to summoning soon now that he thought about it. He'd been waiting until his chakra capacity was quite a bit larger to get fully into it. He should have enough now to summon lower-level chameleons without too much issue. "All right, when?" he asked. "We'll be meeting at the North Gates in 2 hours from now," Kakashi replied. "Best get ready quickly." Daki nodded in understanding. That gave him a decent while to rest and recover the chakra he'd used up this morning during training. "I'll meet you guys there, then," he replied, and made to leave. "Before you leave, there's something I want to ask you, or at least point out." Kakashi's voice stopped him. "You seem to know a lot about Naruto, despite rarely interacting with him." Daki paused. How annoying. He wouldn't have said what he had to Hinata, if he knew Kakashi was watching. Thankfully, this, he'd long since prepared an excuse for. "I'm not an idiot, you know," Daki responded, looking over his shoulder and smirking at Kakashi. "I'll lay it out simply for you to connect the dots. My parents were killed by the Kyuubi. Naruto was born on October 10th, the very same night. There's an absurd hatred directed at him by the older generation of this village, and to sum it up, as you've probably noticed, I'm pretty decent at fuinjutsu. He tossed a wave over his shoulder at Kakashi, flashing his tattooed palm at the man, before continuing on. I see. Kakashi mused, nodding. There was no need for some long drawn-out excuse. Keeping it vague was the best way to go about it, hinting at knowing about Naruto's Jinchuriki status, and his dead parents, were good enough reason for him to have kept an eye on Naruto and learned about him. Unlike your standard, scrub Genin, Deki did not need to bother with a backpack to carry his equipment and supplies for the mission. Though, maybe that wouldn't be a bad idea, he mused as he approached the north gates of the village. Not a backpack with supplies, but rather, perhaps some kind of weighted back, or torso weights. He could really up the grind even further with that. He put it out of mind as he reached the gate, finding Naruto, Sakura and Sasuke already waiting. Sasuke greeted him with a nod, while Sakura waved at him. Hey Deki, going out on a mission? The pink-haired girl asked. Yep, he nodded, with you guys actually, apparently I'm supposed to tag along. Eh? Naruto sounded off loudly, but why? We don't need your help, we're the best. Do you have to complain about everything? Sakura groaned, after the way wave went, I'm totally fine with the extra help, right Sasuke-kun? She immediately looked towards the boy for his approval. Sasuke shrugged, I don't really care either way, he replied, before smirking at Deki, crossing his arms coolly and leaning against the gate frame, just don't slow me down. Right back at you, Deki snorted, the record is 3-0 in my favor, remember? That was a long time ago. Sasuke shrugged. It was a week ago. Deki pointed out dryly. Semantics. The Uchiha rolled his eyes. I've grown much stronger since then, learned a new powerful jutsu and a few techniques. Things won't end the same way next time we spar. Oh, look at you cute little Genin getting along like barking dogs. Kakashi's voice cut in before he could respond. It brings a tear to this old man's eye. You're late. Naruto growled at him. Kakashi ignored him and gestured to his side, where a tall, willowy man with long brown hair stood, dressed in blue, a headband depicting the symbol of the hidden waterfall village tied around his forehead. So, this is our client, he explained. His name is Shibuki, he's the leader of the waterfall village. Our job is to escort him back home more or less. Don't you feel important? The man, Shibuki, introduced himself, while Naruto and Sakura together griped at Kakashi for making them wait so long. From what he idly made out, they were actually supposed to meet an hour ago. Still, all that was mostly drowned out as Deki stared at the waterfall. Shinobi, don't tell me. He thought. He remembered this guy, from a minicide movie. Something told Deki, this wasn't going to be as simple a mission as Kakashi claimed it would be. Not long later, they were on the road, moving at a slow pace along the path heading out of Konoha and through the huge trees along the way. Why are we walking though? Deki had to wonder. No, seriously, why? He could understand if Shibuki was a civilian, but he wasn't, he was a shinobi. So Shibuki Sakura struck up conversation not long after leaving the village. Since you're the leader of your village, doesn't that make you the Takekage? Shibuki blinked, I suppose so. Wow, and you're so young. She praised him, making the man laugh sheepishly. Honestly, calling him a kage is insulting to kage. Deki resisted the urge to snort. Instead, he slowed down a bit and dipped to the back of the group, so he didn't need to talk to anyone, guarding the rear with Sasuke. If things were going to go pear-shaped on this mission, then he wanted to be as prepared as possible. And there was one technique he could work on, that shouldn't be too hard. Naruto got it down instantly, more or less after all. With a small flare of chakra, a small puff of smoke erupted from his right palm, and suddenly he was holding a white-hilted tanto. Sasuke raised an eyebrow at him, but said nothing. Hours later, Deki had to wonder, is Naruto really a damn prodigy after all, because he'd expended a decent little chunk of chakra, and all he'd managed to do so far was coat the sword in his chakra. It was a lot harder to convert the flowing chakra into the lightning element. He'd briefly got it to spark for a bit, startling the others with him, but he hadn't been able to hold it. He was missing a spark of knowledge, the trick to keeping it going. He knew he was on the cusp of it though. It was like having a word on the tip of your tongue, but just not remembering it. Typical. Why couldn't things ever be easy for him? Deciding to chuck it in for now, and recover his chakra, Deki sealed the tanto back in his palm. No matter, I just have to grind more, he nodded to himself. The grind would never betray him in the end. Giving up? Kakashi asked, eyeing him with amusement. Just taking a break to think. The Genin rolled his eyes. You already know what I'm missing anyway, why not just tell me? The asshole had been peeking over his shoulder at him, struggling along with the chakra flow technique, before giggling and going back to his smut. Ah, but then I'd be depriving you of a wonderful learning experience. Kakashi I smiled. Prick. I hate you. Deki deadpanned. And thus my day is complete. Kakashi snorted, turning back to his book. Hate him so much. A pat on his shoulder distracted him, and he looked to see Sasuke giving him an understanding nod. You see why I'm beginning to envy you? He asked dryly. Yes, he fucking did. Deki nodded. Somehow, just the fact that there was a guy who knew all the answers he needed, that was right there and able to help him easily, yet for his own amusement, not doing so, somehow made the gains even slower. He was clearly a heretic to the grind. It wasn't long later that they arrived, more or less at their destination. It would have went much quicker, even with walking, if Shibuki wasn't jumping at every shadow and hiding behind Sakura, multiple times, after birds made loud squawking noises above. Kakashi had went into an explanation, when Sakura asked, about Shibuki's father, the old leader of Taki. A man who fought off the current Sushikage to protect his village, and losing his life later in the process after the fight. Shibuki wasn't even worth calling him a shadow of the man. Deki shook his head, and instead focused on the absolutely massive waterfall cascading down the side of a huge mountain. It was quite a view, he had to admit. Maybe even worth putting up with. Screwbuki. Shibuki-sama. Two kids rushed over just as they stopped at the base of the waterfall, carrying rubbish bags. Hey, don't come so close, Shibuki rebuked them, when they stopped in front of him. I'm the village leader, you know. Deki resisted the urge to snort. Instead, he sat down on a nearby tree trunk. We're out here cleaning up the river, you know. The small, cute girl of the two, wearing her brown hair in toe pigtails and with her bangs combed over one eye, responded. He vaguely remembered her as well. Well, whatever, Deki tuned them out. He continued ignoring them even as Shibuki roped them in to help them clean litter out of the river, as an extra D-rank mission, and Kakashi agreed, much to Naruto's vocal annoyance. He was quick to give in though when the kids thanked him. Ever eager to please others who were nice to him, or stroked his ego. Kakashi sat on a rock to the side of him with Shibuki. You know, you should help them as well. He beckoned at the three of Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura at the river surface, picking up trash and loading it into bags. I would, but it would deprive them of a wonderful and fulfilling experience of community service. Daiki responded dryly. Besides, I only signed up for this mission, and you aren't my sensei, so you can't make me do it like them. Ah, frustrated at your inability to succeed. I see, I see. Kakashi nodded sagely, before turning to Shibuki. So, what do you make of the recent rumors of suspicious activity going around in this general area lately? He asked, ending his conversation with Daiki. Fuck Ranmaru's eyes, maybe plucking that eye out of Kakashi's head and killing him would be worth going missing. Nin. A small grunt at his other side made him look to the girl, Shitsuku, to see her struggling to drag the trash bag off to be disposed of. Here, I'll get it. Daiki offered, standing and grasping the opening of the bag and easily hefting it up. Ah, thanks Onyi-chan. She smiled at him brightly, you're so strong. She praised. I am, from a lot of hard work. He agreed, and promptly flashed a middle finger over his shoulder at Kakashi when the man snorted. So, can you show me where to get rid of this Shitsuku-chan? Sure, follow me. Skipping forward happily, Shitsuku gestured for him to follow her. He was led through the forest to what looked like a dumping ground. Shitsuku helpfully informed him that everything piled up there was destroyed completely at the end of each month, though she didn't actually know how, so couldn't tell him the exact details. Why don't they just seal it all away, he had to wonder. Storage scrolls were piss easy to make, he'd learned how to do so in roughly 2 weeks or so. And they couldn't tell him they had no sealing expertise in their village. They had Fu, didn't they? The Seven Tails Jinchuriki, someone in there had to have sealed the Nanabi into her. Man, if only he could examine Fu's seal. It was bound to be much weaker than the 8 trigram seal, yet at the same time, much easier to learn. He put that out of mind, and walked Shitsuku back to the riverfront, though he was a bit surprised about a certain someone being gone. Where's Kakashi? He asked Sajuke, who was his way with a bag held over his shoulder, as Shitsuku shipped back over to help the others continue cleaning up the trash in the river. Who knows, he shrugged. He got a messenger hawk, then rushed off somewhere. Told us to head back to Konoha once we're finished cleaning up this trash. Giving him a nod, Sajuke trekked down the path Daiki just came from, muttering under his breath about Kakashi all the way. Kakashi just left. Left the last Uchiha and the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, alone, outside another village. Bullshit. Daiki narrowed his eyes, making his way back over to sit down on the tree stump he'd claimed. Something was clearly going on behind the scenes, clandestine and something that was to be kept off the books. Kakashi must have another mission in the area and is using us as a smokescreen, he mused. He also couldn't be sure the Hokage actually signed him off for this mission. Kakashi clearly saw how strong he was, and perhaps fibbed a bit to get Daiki to accompany him so he could work as backup for Sajuke, Naruto and Sakura. And there was no point in even bringing up those suspicions with the Hokage either, because if the mission was as important as it was for Kakashi to ditch Naruto and Sajuke for a bit outside the village, then the Hokage would totally cover for him. Well, whatever. He just had to be ready for when whatever enemies in the area attacked. Besides, this would be another good test for how much he'd progressed. At least there was entertainment in the meantime. Like Naruto annoying Shitsuku by making fun of Shibuki, and her pushing him straight into a piece of dog shit. It was the little things that mattered in life. In the meantime, he ran his hands over his wrists and ankles, sealing away his weights for now. After Naruto managed to wash the clumps of dog shit from his sandals and between his toes, the blonde-haired boy collapsed on his backside. You know, I'm pretty hungry, he declared and looked over at everyone. What do you say we take a break and eat some food? Actually, I could go for Daki began, but, before he could fully agree, he was cut off. If you're going to eat, you can leave, Shibuki scoffed, rudely. You're pretty much done already, so we can call it here and part ways now. Daki worked his jaw back and forth, and resisted the urge to smack him one. The guy was already annoying him, cutting him off like that was grating on top of it. Ha! Naruto growled, jumping to his feet, wet sandals making squishing noises in the grass. What a thing to say after us helping you back here. You're a real lousy jerk, Datbeo. Daki found himself nodding in agreement. Not that any of it really mattered, since he already knew where the entrance to the village was. Enough, Naruto, we'll do just that, Sasuke cut in, giving Shibuki a terse nod, before turning on his feet and walking away. Sakura called after him and rushed over to him, making him pause. The entrance to his village must be nearby, he doesn't want us finding the entrance. But Leaf and Waterfall are allies, right? Sakura protested, so what if we know where the entrance is? Shibuki spat to the side, maybe, for now. But, can you say that you'll always be loyal to your village and never betray it? If you ever did, you'd pose a massive risk to our village. Sound logic? Daki shrugged, an annoying ass coward he may have been, but he was right on the money there at the very least. That's right. Sasuke agreed. Naruto growled, now you're questioning how loyal we are. You bastard. He snarled at Shibuki. He's right, you know. Sakura for once, was in agreement with Naruto, at least say thanks. Well, he was definitely an ungrateful prick about it. Daki mused, hopping off the tree trunk he was sitting on and walking over to join Sasuke. Shibuki ignored him, growling right back at Naruto, before huffing and looking away. Just leave already. We will. Naruto scoffed, turning on his heel and walking over to the rest of the squad. We want nothing to do with a place like this anyway. See you later, Naruto, Dakinai-chan. Shitsuku opted to wave them goodbye instead of getting absorbed in the nonsense. Why yeah. Naruto stammered, unable to hold his angry expression at her earnest goodbye, and waved his hand over his shoulder. Later, Shitsuku. Daki bid her goodbye. Maybe he was wrong about things going south. Like, he remembered Naruto freely using Kurama's chakra in Waterfall. He didn't learn to do that until the Chunin exams, which were 2.5 months away. He was about to turn and leave with Team 7, when he froze, a tingle running down his spine, and Daki whipped around, glaring at the huge waterfall, and at the same time. Mom! Shitsuku's horrified scream an instant later made him whip around again, just in time to see a heavy-set, warm-faced woman stumbling out of the forest. She was struggling step by step, panting deeply and pale-faced. Shibuki-sama, danger, in the village. She managed to utter, before falling forward. She would have landed flat on her face if Daki didn't leap into action, crossing the distance between them in a blink and catching her. As he did, he noticed a kunai was lodged pretty deep into her back. A lady of this age, and a civilian, making her way here with this in her. He grimaced. It was impressive of her. The strength of a mother fearing for her child, huh? Mom, Mom. Shitsuku rushed over in tears. Please be okay. She begged. Daki plastered a reassuring smile on his face. She'll be fine, Shitsuku, I promise. He told her, before gently laying the woman down to the ground. As he did, he caught sight of Shibuki, he'd completely locked up and was shaking with terror at the news she brought. Some fucking takeikage. Deki. Sasuke shouted, getting his attention. I know. He nodded in reply, hiding they may have been, but they weren't any good at concealing their presence properly. Sakura, come over here and keep pressure on this lady's wound. Naruto, guard them. Right. Sakura agreed, rushing over, dropping to her knees over the lady and doing just that. Don't tell me what to do. Naruto griped, but he did as asked, pulling out a pair of kunai and taking up a guard position. Just as he did, there was a chorus of splashing water, and from the waterfall, a group of Shinobi, all dressed in grey and light blue, burst of the waterfall, 8 in total, and only one of them stood out, a tall muscular man, wearing a sleeveless black muscle shirt and a pair of arm warmers. Gotcha! The standout leader gleefully shouted, whipping his hand out alongside his apparent subordinates, each of them unleashing a bevy of shuriken and kunai towards the biggest target, Deki, and those around him. Like hell. Deki thrust both arms out, palms wide open, and flared his chakra through his palms, force palm jutsu. He shouted. Twin coronas of pure wind force erupted, merging together into a huge gale of force and tore the rain of weapons from the sky, in the process, slamming into 2 of the attacking Shinobi, while the others avoided the concussive blast. He didn't hold back this time at all though, and used both together. The audible crunch of their bones echoed throughout the area, before they fell to their deaths. 6 left, and they hit the ground running. They ignored Sasuke entirely, and rushed Deki's area. Clicking his tongue, Deki held out his hand and summoned his Tanto. Ignoring Sasuke was a mistake. Getting behind them in a blur, Sasuke unwound a demon windmill shuriken and whipped it through the air. It tore through the gap between them like a buzzsaw. Just as it was about to catch the leader in the back though, he scoffed, "Nice try, kid." He hollered, jumping over it and letting it wind clearly beneath him. Light glinted behind the shuriken and Sasuke jerked his hand back, ninja wire becoming visible attached to the shuriken and pulling it right back around at the leader. The leader's eyes widened noticeably, before with a growl, he ran through a few hand seals, and with a puff of smoke was replaced by a log that the huge shuriken pierced into. Only for a second shuriken to seemingly materialize from the shadow of the first as it stabbed into the log and ping through the air to stab deep into the side of one of the other Shinobi. Shadow shuriken. Deki realized. With the leader out of the way, and the subordinates now cut down to 4, Deki exploded forward in a blindingly fast shunshin. 3 juked around him. The path of a shunshin was obvious, but his target had no chance to even attempt to dodge before Deki's Tanto pierced his throat and ended his life. Shadow Clone Jutsu. He heard Naruto shout from behind him and the clang of metal and ripped his Tanto free from the corpse's throat and with a thought, sealed it again. Deki grinned as he caught sight of all 3 being held up by clones of Naruto. The blonde had sent out multiple clones to take them on and hold them back to protect the others. And left a perfect little bit of distance for him. Rapidly his hands came together before flashing through a sequence of hand seals. Electricity sparked around his hands as he finished and he thrust out both hands, lightning style, electromagnetic murder. He roared, dozens of forks of lightning exploding through the air towards them. Held up by Naruto, and with the sheer speed of his jutsu, the 3 of them, alongside Naruto's clones, had no chance of dodging. They screamed in agony and their bodies completely locked up and began spasming as the lightning ran through their veins and cooked them from the inside out, the smell of sizzling flesh riding on the air. They died quickly, while Naruto's clones puffed out of existence. Holy crap, dat bao! Naruto gaped, that is such a cool jutsu. Sadly, Daiki didn't have time to bask in the awe of his fellow genin and whirled around to where Sajuke was, to see him engaging the leader in a rapid back and forth of taijutsu. Sajuke had the edge in speed and skill, but the man was taller, had a longer reach, and was edging him out in pure physical strength. Sajuke, fireball! Daiki called out, already going through the hand seals. Right. Sajuke agreed, catching on quick and disengaged from his opponent, jumping back. It left the man with his back towards the waterfall, with Daiki and Sajuke pincerring him on either side and going through identical hand seals. As one, both genin finished and cupped their fingers around their mouths and exhaled powerfully, fire style, fireball jutsu. Damn it! The man shouted angrily, with little place to run. If he jumped back onto the water, he'd be a sitting duck. He ran through a rapid set of hand seals himself, water style, water wall. Spinning, the man exhaled himself and spewed out a surge of water that swept around him to block the pair of fire jutsu. Steam erupted when they impacted, blanketing the area. Daiki kept his ears peeled and slowly started going through a few more hand seals, preparing to unleash another jutsu and kill him for good. But when the steam died down a moment later, he was nowhere to be seen. Damn it, he ran. Sajuke cursed. Probably back into the village then. No way a troop this small and weak could threaten an entire village, even a minor one. Daiki agreed, easing up on his hand seals. There's probably more already in there, probably much stronger ones at that. If he remembered right, one of them was at least a jonin, and a traitor to waterfall, nowhere near Kakashi's level, but a jonin nonetheless. Sajuke nodded, before glaring over at Shibuki, who had collapsed to his knees and huddled into a shiver, cowering ball. Daiki bore witness to a rather shocking and odd event, Sajuke gaping stupidly in shock. The last Uchiha had no words for the scene before him, and clearly couldn't understand it either. It would have made for quite the comical sight that Daiki would have had a grand time laughing about, at any other time. Sadly, he could not. How is she, Sakura? Daiki rushed over to the group huddling over Shitsuku's mother. It's not deep that she'll die right away, but she needs medical attention right away or... The pink-haired girl looked up and explained, before trailing off. Shitsuku's lips trembled, tears streaming from her eyes. Is Mom gonna die, Daikini-chan? She asked, despair in her voice. She'll be fine. Daiki pat her head reassuringly and smiled gently at her. I'll make sure, I promise. She sniffled, but put on a brave face and nodded at his words. Shibuki could learn a thing or two from a girl like this. He resisted the urge to snort derisively and dropped to his knees, running through hand seals, mystical palm jutsu. The tan, muscular boy declared, green light flaring to life around his hands, and he directed it to the women collapsed below him. Medical ninjutsu. Sakura gasped, eyes going wide with awe. Too bad, that once again, he could not bask in it, and this time it was from a pretty girl, a 3 out of 10 on his personal thick smashable babes scale even. She had the ass and hips to qualify, okay. Once Daiki removed the kunai from Shitsuku's mother and healed her up enough to make sure her life wasn't in any danger, the group quickly located deeper into the forest, out of sight and sound. Daiki sat his ass down against a tree, catching his breath, and Shitsuku immediately slammed into his side and huddled against him, arms wrapped around his midsection. She apparently found comfort during this situation in being close to him. Daiki, how much chakra have you got left? Sajuke got right down to the brass tacks as soon as he finished healing the woman. You fired off quite a few jutsu there. Enough, Daiki answered, about 3/4 of my total, I've got enough in the tank to put the boot to these idiots' asses. Sasuke nodded, right. He crossed his arms, before looking at Shibuki. Looks like our mission continues then. Shibuki opened his mouth, but Deki cut him off. That is, unless you don't want our help. He raised an eyebrow pointedly. The leader of Waterfall grimaced. No, I suppose there's no choice. He visibly trembled for a moment, before swallowing and composing himself. Oh yeah. Naruto pumped his fist. Now we can go pay those clowns back for jumping us like that. My thoughts, exactly. Sasuke smirked. Sakura, you stay here and guard the kids and the kids' mother, we'll be going ahead. Sakura grimaced, but nodded. All right Sasuke-kun, I'll keep them safe. She promised. Well, even she can't fuck up hiding away far away from the fight and looking over a few kids. Deki mused, before slowly standing up. I'm gonna go take care of these idiots invading your village, K. He pressed his hand atop Shitsuku's head, gently forcing her to let go. Okay, kick their butts, Nii-chan. The young girl rubbed her eyes before cheering him on. He flashed her a confident smile and a thumbs up, before joining Sasuke, Naruto and Shibuki to head out towards the waterfall village. Shibuki led them back towards the river, and then towards the waterfall itself, edging around the water surface over a series of rocks that led to a round behind the huge waterfall. So your village is hidden behind a place like this, huh? Sasuke mused thoughtfully. Shibuki sighed. Let me be clear, do not tell anyone about this entrance. He ordered, voice serious and level, for once. He hopped down off of the rock surface, onto a narrow pathway that was only about a foot wide. We know. Naruto rolled his eyes, hopping down after him, followed by Naruto and Deki himself. Continuing on, Shibuki led them over the path, to directly behind the waterfall itself, where a large cavern system seemed to lay. But there was little to it, just a wide empty cavern, beyond the large holes filled with water. Just as I remember. Deki nodded to himself. As one, all four of them quickly took position behind a large rock outcropping near the entrance, Deki on the farmost left and Sasuke the farmost right, with Naruto and Shibuki in the middle. Be ready, Naruto. Sasuke ordered. That's my line. The blonde shot back, drawing a kunai and preparing. Deki ignored them, spreading his awareness out. But he couldn't feel anyone in the cavern beyond them, and not a sound echoed beyond that of dripping water. It's fine, there's no enemies in here that I can sense. Deki voiced. If there was an enemy in here in such close proximity that he couldn't sense, they'd have far bigger things to worry about than getting into the waterfall village anyway. Shibuki, who had crouched down and covered his head with his hands, perked up at the mention of no enemies and stood up, pushing past the three boys and making his way around the rocky outcropping towards the holes filled with water. This way. He ordered, beckoning the three Konoha Genin to follow. Hurry. He prompted them, before diving straight into the first hole of water. Hey Sasuke, Deki. Naruto gave them both a blank look. Sasuke sighed, we have no choice. He huffed, before following after Shibuki, prompting Naruto to do the same. Deki rolled his eyes and did the same. Why did he have to be so dramatic about leading the way into the hole? He could have literally just pointed and said, there's the entrance, but no, he had to be all dramatic about it, as if it was some big revelation and trying to shock them by jumping into the water-filled holes. Drama queen. The Tangenin huffed, the sounds of water splashing loudly as Sasuke and Naruto dove in after Shibuki. Seriously, as if it wasn't obvious that those water-filled holes were the entrances to anyone with half a brain. Holding his breath, Daki copied them and dove in. Sound became muted by the water around him, and he swam downwards alongside his fellow genin, finding a narrow cavern at the bottom stretching forward, and glowing with a faint green light. He met the eyes of Sasuke and Naruto, who were examining it, before nodding at them and swimming forward through it, towards the faint silhouette of Shibuki he could see about 30 feet in front. "Do you think they'll be okay?" Shitsuku fretted as she hovered over her mother, her friend, holding her hand to help her keep calm. Sakura gave the younger girl a smile. "Don't worry, Naruto, despite being an idiot is pretty strong," she reassured the girl, "and Sasuke-kun and Daki are the two strongest genin in Konoha." Honestly, it still astounded her that Daki was actually stronger than Sasuke-kun now, but it made some sense, since he had much more time to himself to train. She knew after all, after Wave, that she was dragging her team down. Naruto was far stronger than her, never mind Sasuke-kun, and she was even hampering Sasuke-kun in getting stronger. She was really glad Daki was around to help and pick up her slack. "Between those three, whoever is causing trouble in your village doesn't stand a chance," the pink-haired girl continued. "I mean, you saw how easy they beat those other guys, right?" Now that's interesting to hear." An unfamiliar, male voice suddenly sounded behind her. Sakura's eyes widened and her hand shot down to her pouch, but before she could even reach it, she felt a sharp impact on her neck and everything went dark. "Oh, wow." Naruto trailed off with a gasp as soon as they surfaced, within the middle of a huge lake. And Daki couldn't blame him. They'd had to swim upwards thousands of feet to reach where they were right now, finding themselves within the confines of the top of the mountain, where the waterfall led from. In front of him, he could see a mass of land, filled with beautiful greenery, with a village settlement spread throughout it. Meanwhile behind him, there was another land mass, this time, an island right in the middle of the huge lake. The only thing atop this island though, was a single tree. An absolutely gargantuan tree. It had to be at least 500 feet weight and stretched so far up into the sky he couldn't even measure it properly, but he could tell from the get-go, it was at least, as large as tall as the mountain it resided in. Huge tree branches spread out over the top, creating a massive green camouflage with the many tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, or even millions of thick, healthy green leaves. The branches were so thick, they spread out over the entirety of the top of the open mountain top, blocking it more or less, completely. Village hidden in the waterfall indeed. That meant, the only entrances to the village were either through the actual raging waterfall, or the holes Daki and his companions just came through. That tree. His thoughts trailed off as he stared at it. While even with its size, it still couldn't compare, it did remind him of it. The Shinju, the god tree from which the chakra fruit sprung from, which Kaguya Otsutsuki her power. The hero water comes from this tree as well. Daki's eyebrows furrowed in thought. Was there a connection of some kind? "Daki!" Sasuke called to him, breaking him from his thoughts. The Uchiha met his eyes and gestured with him to follow along with them as they swam towards the shore of the village. He nodded, putting his thoughts aside for now and made his way to the shore with them. "Man, I've never seen such a pretty place." Naruto looked around in awe when they reached the surface. "Man, I wish Sakura could have gotten to see it too." Daki frowned, looking around. It was quiet, eerily quiet. And there was not a single person in sight. He caught the frown on Sasuke's face and knew he was thinking the same. It was only then, Daki noticed something else. Where the hell is Shibuki, he wondered. He was right behind him, so how did that coward give him the slip? Just then, Daki's senses went haywire and he jumped back, just as a series of shurikens screamed through the air towards him. Sasuke moved at the same time, pushing Naruto out of the way of a set going after him, and deflecting them with a drawn kunai. The hell was that? Naruto growled as he landed in the water, before realizing what was going on. From behind the closest village houses, dozens of shinobi dressed the same as the ones from earlier came rushing out, blitzing towards them. Go protect Shibuki! Sasuke shouted at Naruto. The blonde growled again, but dove into the water, out of the way despite his reluctance, leaving the pair of Daki and Sasuke to deal with their approaching enemies. Just like the ones before, Daki noticed, they all wore headbands depicting the symbol of the village hidden in the rain, each with slashes through the middle. Honestly, it was quite a lot of rain shinobi, in total. This time he counted 12, which made for 20 at least. It was like they deserted en masse. Had Nagato already taken over the rain village and killed Hanzo? That didn't matter for now, he supposed. Whipping his hand out, Daki flared his chakra, summoning and shooting forth a series of kunai, shuriken and swords, a small wall of pointy death straight towards the approaching shinobi, before shooting forward himself. Most of them avoided easily. One did not, and was riddled with the weapons, falling dead a moment later. See, that was the problem with rushing in a group, it left you little room to dodge if you were focused on by the enemy. Tora! One of them roared angrily, rage-filled eyes settling on Daki. They were spreading out, trying to flank them from all sides and surround them, but Daki wasn't about that shit. He made a beeline towards the one who shouted. Die! The man shouted as they approached one another. Just as they were in front of one another though, Daki whipped his hand out again, unleashing his force palm jutsu from his left hand and spinning. He talked around the man's lunging stab with his kunai, aimed for the Tantine's throat, and man didn't even have time to register his make before Daki's massively momentum-enhanced knee strike smashed into his temple and crunch went his skull. Then, not taking any time to admire his handiwork, he thrust both hands out again, unleashing the force palm jutsu a second time, jettisoning him backwards through the air like a bullet. He flipped backwards, coming down into a handstand right below another of the men and thrust up with a double mule kick right up at his chin. He, like his fellow, was far too slow to react to the sudden spastic movement and his head snapped up and backwards, his neck breaking audibly and tumbling backwards from the sheer force of the blow. He was just in time to get an upside-down view of Sasuke leaping into the air, his hand cupped around his mouth, fire-style, fireball jutsu. He unleashed a huge fireball down below, catching 4 of the rain ninja before they could escape the blast radius, and their screams echoed loudly as they were burned alive. Daki didn't have time to admire it, because a third changed paths, rushing towards Daki, twin kunai held in his grasp. Thinking quickly, Daki unleashed another shot of the force palm jutsu from both hands into the ground, shooting him up into the air above the man, just as he shot forward, slicing his kunai where Daki's belly was just a mere moment ago. Flipping around above, Daki copied Sasuke, running through hand seals of his own, before inhaling and exhaling powerfully, spitting out a quick fireball jutsu of his own. The man, like his fellows, screamed in agony as he was cooked to death. He landed, and looked to Sasuke, surrounded by the remaining shinobi, only 4 of them. But he didn't have to. Sasuke unleashed a rain of shuriken from his hands, wide and winding, easily dodged by the rain shinobi, except for the wires wrapped around them that bound them in their attempt to dodge. Wires leading back to Sasuke's hands and up to one single one in his mouth, the Uchiha running through 4 rapid hand seals, before flames sparked into existence, before traveling along the wires and lighting the trapped Shinobi alight. The air was filled with the scent of burning flesh. Running chakra through his palms, Deki triggered the return seal on his weapons and summoned them back to his Dimension Force seal. Is that them all? He wondered. They weren't very impressive at all. They were weaker even than Deki had been months ago when he first woke up with his system after being murdered by those rock humpers. The him of back then could have at least taken 2 or 3 of these guys. That left only the main instigator that was after the hero water, and Deki juked to the side, allowing a kunai to pass through the space where his head had been and spun, lashing out with his forearm behind him, just in time to catch and block a powerful punch aimed at his kidney. "Miss me, kid." The grey-haired leader in the muscle shirt cackled. He gave a shout and thrust more force into his fist, trying to overpower Deki's blocked. It didn't work out for him, not like it had for him earlier when he could leverage his greater strength and reach against Sasuke. Deki was not only taller than Sasuke, but far stockier, and far physically stronger as well. Locking him down, Deki summoned his Tanto into his free hand and swung at the man's head, making him yelp and jump backwards. "Man, that was close. You're a strong one, ain't ya?" The man laughed, before shrugging, unconcerned. "Oh well, that's why you make backup plans after all." "What?" A tight pressure on his wrist made him look down, and his eyes widened to see a thick, watery rope wrapped around his wrist, leading straight to the grey-haired rain ninja's hand. "Water style," he growled in realization. He swung his Tanto overhead to cut through it, but as he did, he felt a presence rush him from behind and quickly changed his swing, directing it into a stab directly behind him. "Oh my!" A purring, female voice gasped slightly in surprise. In his peripheral, he caught sight of a pretty, brown-haired woman dressed in a pair of tight spats, and kimono top that hung open at her shoulders, baring her chest, only hidden by a tight crop top that kept her breasts from being in clear view. She jumped backwards, but as she did, Deki felt another tight pressure on his wrists. And then his arms were pulled from both sides, jerking them out and stretching him out so hard it felt like his arms were moments away from being pulled out of their sockets. He, what a big fishy we caught here, eh? His aim. The grey-haired rain cunt cackled once more. "A shame too, he has quite the robust build, does he not?" The kunoichi, his aim appeared, giggled flirtatiously. "Deki!" Sasuke shouted in worry and began rushing over at a blurring speed. "Ah!" The kunai called out to him, making a single hand seal and causing electricity to spark around her hands. "Get any closer and your tasty and muscular friend here is going to become a light bulb." Sasuke skidded to a stop, a snarl on his lips and his Sharingan Tomo spinning in agitation. "Of course the first good-looking chick to flirt with me would be an enemy," Deki groused, ignoring the pain coming from his arms as best he could. Just his luck, as per usual. If only that cunt Kakashi had helped him get the chakra flow technique down. He could just run pure lightning chakra through these damn water whips binding his arms and light these fools up. That left him with only one option. The fools had left his palms exposed to the air. This was going to hurt like fuck though, with his arms pulled out this wide and the force. Deki grit his teeth and braced himself, then he channeled as much chakra into his seals as they could muster, force palm jutsu. He roared, he wanted them to know exactly what killed them. He twisted on his feet as he unleashed it, and a pair of surprised shouts left the two ninja binding him as the pure force behind the jutsu he unleashed from his palms as he jerked his arms, bodily lifted them up and dragged them through the air like a pair of ragdolls. Agonizing pain ran down from Daki's shoulders as his arms were dislocated, but he powered through, a savage smile spreading across his face as he completed his rotation and found the terrified face of his aim soaring towards him, while her cackling buddy soared right past her through the air towards Sajuk. Forcing himself to ignore the pain, Daki thrust both arms out and caught the woman right in the solar plexus. Begone thought. He spat, and once more unleashed what was rapidly becoming his signature technique. The air shook from the sheer force of the impact that roared through the woman's stomach as he unleashed the force palm jutsu at point-blank rage. She gagged, not even able to scream, a deluge of blood erupting from her throat, eyes rolling up into the back of her head, and was summarily shot flying back through the air from the way she came. Fuck! Daki roared as white-hot agony beyond the agony he felt before lanced down his arms. The impact reflected back at him from his jutsu had forced his arms back into their sockets, and holy fucking shit, did it fucking hurt. Ah! Daki groaned, slumping to his knees. The sound of a body hitting the ground drew his attention, and he looked over to see Sajuk hilting his kunai in the throat of Cackleboy, before pulling it out. Daki, you okay? Sajuk asked, rushing over to help him. Could be better, but I'll be fine. Daki replied, though he didn't move from his kneeling position, and his arms were utterly numb beyond the pain burning throughout them. He'd be able to heal them, but it would be a pain in the ass to do it one by one, and hurt like a bitch in the process. Not to mention, he was dwindling though on chakra. He only had about a quarter left now. Right, good, you can rest for now then, Sajuk nodded. Those two seemed to be the leaders, so we just need to get Naruto and Shibuki and we're done here. No, they weren't actually. The leader of this nonsense, and the strongest of them, was still around, hiding somewhere, looking to get his hands on the hero water. Daki opened his mouth to say something, find a way to tell him to keep on his guard, only for his eyes to widen in horror as a tall, burly man with a bandana over his head seemingly materialized from thin air behind Sajuk. Not quite. The man stated with a predatory grin on his face. Sajuk's eyes widened, but he didn't have time to react before the man lashed out and punched him in the side. Sajuk gagged, blood erupting from his mouth, before the force of the punch sent him flying through the air, smashing into and through one of the village houses over 50 feet away, making it collapse on him. Sajuk! Daki shouted in worry, before a snarl of rage at what happened to his maybe semi-friend, and he lunged to his feet, forcing himself to move. The man backhanded him contemptuously before he even got halfway up, smashing him back into the dirt. His cheek flared with pain and stars erupted in his vision. He could already feel a bruise forming from the blow. Before he could even think to do anything or gain his bearings, a fist grasped him by his hair and bodily lifted him up, before his face was brought down into a knee strike. Crunch went his nose as it broke from the blow. The force of it, actually pushing him back up to his feet as the man let go of his hair. Yet, even then his legs threatened to buckle beneath him. If only he could use his A fist deposited itself in his chest and Daki felt his ribs snap under the blow, and then he was soaring through the air, his vision beginning to go dark. Just before his consciousness faded away, he felt a pair of arms wrap around him and the feeling of weightlessness fade away. I've gotcha! A voice echoed in his ears. Who? Darkness claimed him. Consciousness came back to Daki slowly, with a rousing pain that made him just want to go back to the darkness and not feel anything anymore. Every breath he took, no matter how shallow, sent sharp spikes of pain echoing through him. For a few moments, he just lay where he was, staring up at what appeared to be an oval-shaped, glowing green ceiling. What? Did Kakashi come save me and take care of it all or something? He wondered briefly, in a daze. Surely, he would have acted after seeing Sasuke take that hit he did. Ignoring the pain that made him want to curl up into a ball and forgot the world existed, Daki grit his teeth and forced himself to sit up. And blinked. He was in a completely sealed-off, oval-shaped room, almost egg-like even. And he wasn't alone. There was a girl sitting over beside one of the walls, peering out from a small hole in it. A familiar girl. Petite, with tan skin, darker than his own, athletically built and short exotic mint green hair. Her outfit consisted of a short sleeveless white midriff shirt with fishnet armor underneath, long white armlets, and fishnet shorts with a short white apron skirt over it, while a blue-clothed headband was tied around the bicep of her left arm, depicting the symbol Taikigakyo. She turned just then and looked at him, apparently feeling some form of movement behind her, and stared at him blankly, orange eyes blinking owlishly before a wide grin spread across her face. "Hey, you're finally awake!" Fu cheered. "Ha! That voice! That was the one he heard before he passed out. Fu saved him. Dunno if you should be up and about actually. You took a hell of a beating from that Dick Swain she plowed on when he didn't respond, but hey, you were kicking major ass out there. You and your pal wiped out those rain ninja easily, and even those two annoying ones, you did them in good." "Where?" Daki began to ask, before coughing, a splatter of blood leaving his broken nose and pain erupting from his ribs. "Eesh, wish I knew some healing jutsu right about now." Fu winced, rubbing the back of her head sheepishly. "Well, take it easy, you're safe for now. This is my cocoon jutsu. We're inside. As long as we're in here, that guy won't be able to sense us." Oh, that was good. And bad. Because that meant Kakashi hadn't come in and mopped the main villain up like he was supposed to. Was I wrong? Did he actually just leave Naruto and Sasuke unguarded? Daki had to resist the urge to swallow heavily, lest his ribs throb in agony again. It was already taking all he had to keep his thoughts centered. Actually, now that he thought about it, didn't Kakashi only learn about the Akatsuki, after the Chunin exams, from Jiraiya? And there was no way Kakashi could have predicted something like this happening. Like, who would? He only left them to clean up some trash before heading home. Who would expect them to get drawn into an attack on an entire Shinobi village? Focus, he told himself, and looked Fu in the eyes. Cocoon. He made a show of looking thoughtful. Does that make you the Nanabi Jinchuriki? It was blunt, and not skirting the edges at all, but he really didn't have the time to dance around this topic right now. He'd not been taking this seriously at all. He'd let the idea of Kakashi as a safety blanket make him complacent, arrogant in his assured survival. Fu froze. "Ah, you know about that?" The mint-haired girl swallowed heavily herself. "Is that, gonna be a problem?" She looked almost like a deer staring into headlights. Why would she lock up like that just from as? Oh right. Jinchuriki were usually hated by those around them, because people were idiots. God, what a waste. If people trained Jinchuriki in the grind properly, they'd all be absolute beasts when it came to combat by time they were in their tweens. Just look at how fast he was progressing with a bootleg healing factor using the mystical palm jutsu. No, nothing like that. Daki slowly shook his head and gave her what he hoped was a reassuring smile and not a pained grimace. Honestly, wish I was Jinchuriki right about now. That healing factor you guys have would be amazing for me at the moment. I'm all for Team Baijua right now. Fu just stared at him for a moment, before giggling. It is pretty helpful now and then. She nodded, though, not that the Nanabi shares much with me. Besides these Suddenly, a pair of insectoid wings emerged from her lower back and flapped rapidly, lifting her up to her feet. Useful, he noted, before what she said caught on fully. Wait, does that mean you can't use a chakra cloak? Not yet, the bug refuses to let me do it, doesn't like fighting. Fu shrugged, says I should just run away and not risk getting killed. I mean, as far as pragmatic survival goes, it's probably right. Daki sighed. But that was also bad, because, having her able to even use the initial form, not even pulling on the tailed cloaks, would be a massive help. How strong are you? How do you measure up to that guy who beat my shit in? Swian. Fu tilted her head before grinning proudly, and for a moment, hope surged in him. I don't even come close. I'd be lucky to last 15 seconds against him one-on-one if he was serious. Fuck. But then, what was he expecting? Waterfall wasn't exactly known for their powerful Jinchu Yuriki, or well, powerful anything. Waterfall was basically treated as a joke, and only really got any recognition because it sat on the border between the land of fire and earth, and worked as a stopgap if those rock fetishists tried to invade fire country. They were more of an overly large outpost than a real ninja village, to be honest. Their population was less than 2,000. Well, 10 seconds would still be a big help, I guess. Daki tried to be hopeful. Actually, do you know what happened to my friends? Fu winced. Yeah, about that. She trailed off before pointing at the hole that she was peering out of before. You might wanna take a look. He had a feeling he was not going to like this. Ignoring his body protesting even the slightest movements, Daki dragged himself over to the edge of the glowing green cocoon room and peered out of the hole. He found that they were apparently very high up in the massive tree he'd saw earlier, hidden amongst the thick greenery of the leaves, and had a good vantage point directly downwards. He saw the problem immediately. 1. Sajuk was beaten quite badly and hanging, tied up from a large red torii gate. While to the side, a huge rectangular barrier of some kind, with large earth stakes on each corner, held tens of dozens, no rather, multiple hundreds of people all tied up and squished together in there. A flash of pink caught his eyes, and he saw, at the very front of the barrier, was Sakura, tied up alongside Shitsuku and the little boy whose name he hadn't caught that was with them, her mother, laying tied up and unconscious next to them. Fucking hell. Seriously, Sakura? Daki resisted the urge to groan. He hadn't put much thought into leaving her behind, because they'd killed all the Shinobi bar the cackling idiot before heading off. Yet, she'd still somehow managed to get herself captured. Fuck, just fuck. At least Naruto and Shibuki seemed to be still free out there. If he remembered right, they should be somewhere within the same vicinity as them, in amongst this tree. Though, considering the sheer size of it, that wasn't saying much. His eyes drifted to directly outside the barrier, at the front, where a familiar man sat on a rock, arms crossed, wild spiky black hair with a bandana over it. The fuckhead who beat the shit out of him. His vague memories of the movie told him that barrier thing was totally new. And somehow, he seemed far more powerful than he was in the movie, even without the hero's water. There was no way Naruto, even with the initial chakra cloak, could beat this guy. He doubted he'd even be able to with the full one-tail cloak actually. Daki grimaced, turning away from the hole and slowly bringing his hands up. It was painstaking, both literally and figuratively. In the scope of speed he could make one single hand seal. Yeah, luckily he hasn't killed your friends, Fu pointed out optimistically as green chakra blossomed out of his hands. Unluckily, he's holding them hostage to get Shibuki to come out and give him the hero water, at which point, he'll drink it, get way stronger and slaughter us all anyway. Daki seriously wished he never agreed to come on this missions. B-rank mission my ass. He pressed his hands to his chest, and spread the healing chakra of his jutsu through into his ribs, and directed the rest through his arms. He didn't have enough in the tank to heal himself fully, especially if he still wanted to be able to fight. But, as long as he could at least move without being in pain and get some speed back in his arms, he could do something. So, healing jutsu ha. You're pretty good. Fu praised him. I had trouble with those two with the whips earlier, but you took them out in less than a minute, so you're strong on top of being able to heal. Konoha ninja are something else. I'm just built different. Daki couldn't resist the urge to brag a little bit to the pretty girl with him, so, while I'm healing myself a bit, have you got any plans for dealing with that guy? Not really, she gave him a sheepish smile. I've really not got anything with the firepower to bring him down. I have one that could startle him a bit though and give you an opening. All right, he could work with that. That'll do. Daki nodded. Keep him in place for a couple seconds and I'll hit him with my strongest jutsu. Jonin or not, he wasn't going to be shaking off a B-rank lightning jutsu without being fucked up. Gotcha. Fu grinned happily. I'll lay him up, you knock him down, you. She started strong, before trailing off as she realized she didn't know his name. Daki. He introduced himself. Daki, great name. She beamed, and I'm Fu, pleased to meet cha. Like all great plans, they came up with just a few minutes ago and were preparing to put in place, didn't survive contact with the enemy. Or rather, it didn't even get to come into contact with the enemy at all. Shibuki. Suian's voice roared loudly, followed by a sharp, feminine squeal of pain. I'm tired of waiting, you little coward, bring out the hero water now. For every minute you don't, I'll be killing one of these pieces of trash I've caught, starting with this little bitch. Daki cut off the flow of green chakra he was spreading through himself and looked through the hole to get a look, and his eyes widened. The feminine squeal, it had been Shitsuku. Ah, that guy. Fu's face pressed against his as she leaned over his shoulder and stared through it with him, her petite, soft chest pressing into his back, yet he couldn't enjoy it at all. He's really rotten to the core. Threatening civilians, kids at that. Daki grimaced, hands clenched into fists. If only his arms hadn't been fucked up earlier, they could have acted sooner. Now, if they put their plan in motion, Shitsuku would be swept up in his jutsu and die in agony. It may have been hypocritical of him, since he planned on taking the eyes of another child, but he couldn't find it in him to be pragmatic enough to reap the life of that little girl who affectionately called him Niai-chan and who chose him first out of everyone else to seek comfort in when she was scared. What should we do? Fu asked, grimacing. He barely even noticed the feeling of her warm cheek rubbing against his, to be honest. His mind was rushing a mile a minute, no a second. He had 3 options here. 1. Let this guy kill Shitsuku and others, use the time to heal himself a bit more to make sure he was in as best condition as he could be. 2. Take advantage right now with his hands full and put the plan into motion. With his hands full, he'd be even harder pressed to react at all. 3. Waste their plan and save Shitsuku instead of killing him when they had the chance. Fuck it, I'm no little bitch. Daki growled, forcing himself to his feet. He'd already died once, or twice actually. He wasn't afraid to go for round 3 with the Shinigami. It was all or nothing. Even if he went out here and now, he was going to at least make sure he saved Shitsuku and make that fucker work for it. And if he was really lucky, the rage over his death would let Fu or Naruto rage mode into their chakra cloaks and they could tear him apart. Open it up, let's do it. He ordered Fu, already beginning to focus his chakra. Fu stared at him for a moment, before standing up beside him from where she remained kneeling at the hole, and smiling brightly at him. Yeah, let's do it. She agreed. She held her hand in a seal, and a split moment later, the cocoon dissolved from around them, leaving them to free fall from where it was stuck to the bottom of a huge branch. Fu whipped ahead of him with her buzzing wings, shooting down through the air and running through a series of quick hand seals, then opened her mouth and spewed forth a whirlwind of glittering powder that rained down from above. A startled shout left Suyen's mouth as she powder danced down over his form. Fu! He roared angrily, tightening his grip around Shitsuku's neck, making her eyes widen with pain as her windpipe was crushed. Growling, Deki kicked off of the tree and exploded downwards in the fastest shunshin he'd ever used. He summoned his tanto to his hand for accuracy, and as he came down he aimed straight for the Jonin's skull to pierce it from above. He juked to the side and just avoided it, the sleeve on his arm ripping as his blade slashed into it and drew blood, and Deki impacted the ground hard enough to make a crater beneath himself. The man countered instantly, his foot lashing out with a blindingly fast roundhouse. Deki didn't even attempt to dodge, he took it straight on in the chest. He felt his ribs, only barely mended, snap under the blow once again, and a roar of agony left him, but he pushed on regardless. He slapped his hand not holding his tanto onto the man's ankle and unleashed the force palm jutsu. His arm bones felt like they were turning to powder. A shockwave erupted and spread through his kicking leg, and the man shouted in pain, "Little shit!" He spat, eyes closed over, and summarily let go of Shitsuku. Deki caught her in the hand he unleashed his jutsu with, wrapping his arm around her and jumping back, while at the same time tossing his tanto towards Sajuke. The blade pierced through the rope binding him, letting the Uchiha drop to his feet below the torii gate he was dangling from before. Deki! The Uchiha grinned at him and leapt over. As he did, he noticed, Sajuke's nose was broken as well, his face covered in blood and deep bruising. A second later, Fu landed on the other side of him, opposite Sajuke. He gave them both a nod, and looked down to Shitsuku, who was trembling in his grip. "Dekini-chan." She whimpered. Doing his best to ignore his painfully protesting body, Deki gently sat her down and pat her head. "You're safe now," he told her, before quickly pushing her towards the torii gate that led to inside the massive tree. "Go hide in there, quickly, this is gonna get dangerous." Thankfully, she was a smart girl, and did as told, quickly running inside to hide. Suyen thankfully ignored her. Instead the man, eyes bloodshot and glaring bloody daggers at them, was standing a good 50 feet away, rubbing at his ankle. "You know what, I'm going to enjoy crushing your skull between my palms, you little brat," he huffed, before grinning as he set his foot back on the ground. "This works out even better though, right Shibuki? How do you think Konoha will like to find out some of their precious little kiddie Shinobi got killed here? Or how about I snap the snack of this little failed weapon? You better be quick, boy. If you don't Will you shut the fuck up already?" Deki snarled. "Nobody cares about your grandstanding, you washed up old piece of shit." "Yeah, what he said." Fu flashed the Jonin the middle finger with. Sajuke merely smirked, crossing his arms and nodding in agreement. Suyen snarled, "Uppity little brats." He spat. He twisted his foot behind him and was about to rush them, when a hail of kunai and shuriken fell through the air above him, aiming for his head. Tch. The man clicked his tongue, jumping back to avoid them, and all eyes were drawn up to the trees. where a familiar orange-clad blonde stood 100 feet above on a branch, arms crossed and a smirk on his face. Looks to me, the blonde began, hopping off the branch and shooting down towards him, his hands flashing into a cross-shaped hand seal. That you're outnumbered, old man. There was a series of puffs of smoke around Naruto, and suddenly, where there was one blonde shooting down through the air, now where was over 30. Annoyances. Every Suion tried to complain, but Daki took advantage of the distraction. Arms shooting up, he unleashed every single weapon he had in his Dimension Force seal, multiple dozens of kunai, shuriken and swords blitzing through the air towards the Jonin faster than bullets. At his side, both Sasuke and Fu ran through hand seals. Fire style, Dragon Fire Jutsu. Wind style, Great Breakthrough. Sasuke spat out a massive roaring dragon of flames, while Fu unleashed a powerful gale force wind that could uproot trees from her hands. The mint-haired girl made a sound of shock as her wind slammed into Sasuke's attack, and the roaring dragon of flame utterly ballooned in size to dwarfing proportions. With Naruto coming from above and all around, his series of weapons and Sasuke and Fu's unintentional combo jutsu. They really do go all out. Suion may have been faster and stronger than all of them, but even that only went so far when he was surrounded on basically all sides. Naruto's clones rushed him, lashing out with a series of bone-crunching punches and kicks from all sides, while his weapons and the raging flame dragon swept over the enemy Jonin. They were silent, the only noise being the crackling flame of the inferno that was burning into Suion's position. And Naruto hopping away from the fire, clutching his smoking bottom. Hot, hot, hot. The blonde yelped, slapping his own ass to put out small embers that were burning into his backside. Can't you watch your aim, you jackass? He spat at Sasuke when he finished. How about you not get in the way of my jutsu, idiot? Sasuke shot back. You guys are a riot. Fu laughed heartedly, before crossing her arms behind her head. Man, that was easier than I thought it was going to be. Daki frowned. It was. But, something was off. He didn't sense the guy escaping the attack at all. Actually, in the end, he didn't even try from the brief glimpse he got before the attack slammed into his position. But, what was even more off-putting? Where was that familiar death wail of agony that usually happened when somebody burned to death? Or, where was the scent of crispy fried human flesh? Wait, something's WR. He never got to finish, because abruptly, a massive amount of steam began to emit from the fire and it rapidly dwindled down. To reveal Suion, but wholly different. He was wrapped from head to toe in a churning armor of pure water. I can't believe I have to use my ultimate jutsu against a bunch of weak brats because I wasn't taking you all seriously, the Jonin spat angrily, before shaking his head. No matter, it's simple. Now that you've seen my water armor, you just have to die. He lifted his hand as he finished, and punched out with a simple jab. From that jab, a gigantic fist of purely compressed water shot through the air towards them, not unlike a huge Baijua chakra claw. It was absolutely gargantuan and despite its size, shockingly fast. Only Fu had anywhere to run with something this size. On instinct, Daki launched himself into the air, forward to meet it and slammed both palms into the jutsu, pumping all of the chakra he had left, that wouldn't kill him, into his force palm jutsu. The concentrated shockwave that blasted from his hands, tore right through it, leaving the jutsu to collapse apart like a pair of splitting waves. His eyes widened immediately after though, as Suion appeared in the shadow of his jutsu, so fast Daki didn't even see him move and he couldn't do anything as a water-enshrouded hand wrapped around his neck and thrust down. His back slammed into the ground a split moment later, hard enough to crater it inwards, and his spine erupted into agony, then choked as the hand tightened around his windpipe and the man began strangling him to death, with Daki helpless to do anything else. Daki! He heard someone shout. He couldn't tell who. Everything was going dark. His eyes rolled up and he could just make out Sasuke, Naruto and Fu rushing to help him, but the man choking the life out of him, lifting his other and with a snort, and from his fingers, erupted massive pillars of water that slammed into the three of them and subsumed them, carrying them out of sight. Bastard! Daki used all the remaining mental faculties he had to curse the man in his head. For a brief moment, his gaze drifted up, and he may have been hallucinating as he neared death, because, for a brief second, he thought he caught sight of Kakashi running through a rapid set of blurring hand seals. But then he was just gone. Enough, sensei! A sudden voice bellowed out in a rage, and he felt the fingers around his throat ease up, allowing him to suck in great big gasps of air and fill his lungs. Hisuian snorted, completely forgetting about Daki and letting him go, turning towards the lake. So you finally crawled out of your hiding spot, you little spineless coward. He spat. Coughing and hacking, Daki feebly turned on his side and looked to the lake, and there, it was Shibuki. But, completely different from before. He an oddly shaped glass bottle in one hand, filled with a mysterious-looking liquid. It was like water, but silvery in color instead of clear. And there was a massive raging aura of chakra blazing around Shibuki's body, so powerful and tangible the very air seemed to roil and twist, a powerful seething aura of chakra that reminded Daki of a Baijua chakra cloak almost. And his eyes, so different from the shaky, cowardly things from earlier. A blazing rage stood out in them now as he glared bloody murder at Suion. You're right, of course, but I can't stand aside anymore. I wonder, is this how my father felt back then? I finally understand. Shibuki trailed before snarling, I'm your opponent now, sensei. As soon as he said so, the water he was standing on erupted into a massive geyser. It wasn't a jutsu, but from the sheer speed and force Shibuki erupted forward, closing the distance between him and his former sensei in the blink of an eye. Suion only had the barest of moments to bring his arms up to block the sudden punch, yet, even with his armor, the sheer force behind it lifted him up and sent him flying back like a missile. Yet, even as he flew back so fast Daki could barely see him, a massive of water tentacles erupted from his water-clad body, each compressing into spiked ends and lashing down at Shibuki. Daki's eyes widened when he noticed one coming right for him as well. He couldn't move. He feebly pushed himself up, before collapsing again. Shibuki clicked his tongue. Rapidly he appeared beside Daki and ran through a few hand seals, the bottle of water dropping from his grip, before opening his mouth and spewing out what was almost a literal tidal wave in scope. It was so huge it blocked everything out of view for Daki. Holy shit, he gaped. The hero water was fucking insane. Suddenly, the tidal wave was swept aside and Suion's laughter echoed. Using water against me when I have my water armor. You never learn, you twit. He mocked, suddenly appearing in front of Shibuki in a blur of speed Daki couldn't keep up with at all. Shibuki caught a punch, and retaliated with one of his own, only to have to quickly retreat back as from dozens of water spikes erupted from the missing ninja's body attempting to pierce Shibuki. Shibuki snarled, forming a single hand seal, and then thrust his hand out, grasping a massive sword of compressed water and rushing at his sensei. Who did the exact same. Daki could only watch helplessly as they engaged in a terrifying fast-zipping battle of taijutsu and sword strikes. And he could barely follow it at all. But, as it continued on, he noticed The roaring chakra shroud around Shibuki was getting smaller and smaller, and bit by bit, Shibuki became slower and weaker, his sensei beginning to overpower him as the difference in their base's abilities became utterly apparent. Shit. Daiki looked behind him to his companions, only to find all three of them laid out in a trio of craters, unconscious. They hadn't just been crushed and subsumed by his earlier attack, they'd been drowned into unconscious while at it, probably once they were slammed back into the ground and forced to breath because of the stun that came from the impact. He can't last much longer, Daiki realized. And once Shibuki fell, it was all over. That guy would kill them all and get the hero water as he wanted. Daiki didn't even know why the fucking idiot wanted it. He should know using it would take a chunk of his life force. Even a sip from it, while it would take his power massively, it would only last a minute or two at most, and it would take a good 10 years off of his lifespan. Though, 10 years instead of his life would be a good trade-off at this point. His eyes drifted to the bottle of hero water laying innocent beside him and temptation fled. Fuck it, he would die anyway at this rate. And big deal, he'd die at like 100 instead of 110 or something, if somebody didn't murder his ass first anyway. Reaching out with a shaky arm, Daiki grabbed the bottle. He was so weak though, that he had to struggle to just pop the cork off of it and open it. To the grind. He snorted to himself, before holding it up to his lips and taking a sip. He swallowed. And then, everything went still. The haze of darkness around his vision cleared up, his senses spread out massively, his eyesight sharpened, the pain that had been plaguing him faded away. And Daiki stood once more. A rushing sensation ran through his veins, and he felt his chakra click, and like a flame fed barrels and barrels of oil, it ignited, it exploded, it grew, it consumed and it fucking roared. A massive aura of chakra erupted from his tenketsu, and for this moment, Daiki felt it. Power. This was the feeling of strength, for this moment, he could feel it in his veins. He was standing before the line, that when breached, allowed one to grasp the power of a kage. His gaze snapped over towards Shibuki as the air shook as they clashed water swords, and he noticed, Shibuki being pushed to his knees now by his sensei, the flame of chakra that was once an inferno around his form, now but a glittering haze of dwindling embers. Daiki popped the cork back in the bottle, and lowered it. Then he moved. The ground cracked and cratered under his feet, he could barely control his own newly enhanced strength and speed. What seemed like an instant later, he was at Suien's side, thrusting his palms out and unleashing his jutsu. The air boomed as if the sky roared with thunder, and twin shock waves erupted from his palms with such force that the air in front of him seemed to crack and shimmer. Suien roared in agony, yet over it, Daiki heard as his ribs went snap under the force that transmitted through his water armor. And a split moment later, he shot through the air like a cannonball, shooting straight over the of hundreds of feet to the other side of the lake, smashing into and through a series of houses. Oops. You. Shibuki gaped at him, just as the chakra fully dwindled from around him. You drank it. He trailed off, before his eyes shut and he fell unconscious. If he didn't finish this quickly, that was what would happen to him. Daiki caught him before he fell into the water. In a blur of pure speed, he carried the older Shinobi back to the island with the huge tree and sent him down. Then he rushed over the lake in a blur with Shunshin, moving so fast it was almost mind-bogglingly to Daiki. He must have been moving over 10 times as fast as he could. He landed on the other shore a split few seconds later, just as his enemy erupted from the debris of buildings. It had taken him a good nearly 10 or so seconds to recover from Daiki's surprise attack. If not for that water armor, he would have likely been killed right then and there, as the force palm jutsu pulverized him from the inside out and crushed his organs. I should have snapped your damn neck the second I got my hands on you earlier. Suion spat, before rushing him, water erupting from his feet and propelling him forward. It was funny. Just a little bit ago, he couldn't even see this guy moving. Yet. So slow. Daki shook his head as he easily tilted his head to the side, avoiding a punch tipped with a lance of water, then hopped over a sweeping kick that unleashed a blade of water that less than a minute ago would have cut his legs off before he could see it coming, so goddamn slow. Was this what it felt like to be Kakashi against a scrub, he wondered. Shoot you, Suion began to roar in a rage, only to be immediately shut up as Daki's palm slammed into and through the water armor around his face and grasped him by the skull with bone-crushing force. Hey, Daki could feel the bloodlust building up within him now that the shoe was on the other foot. How about I thank you for your treatment of me earlier? And how you tried to kill Shitsuku while using her as a hostage. The water armor around the man roiled and raged like ocean waves. He could see almost in slow motion as dozens upon dozens of spikes began forming, intending to impale him. Daki unleashed a force palm jutsu at point-blank rage, right into the man's face. The forming water spikes flopped apart. The water armor didn't dissipate. He was still alive. The water armor must have blunted enough of it for him to live. No matter. Daki smirked. He lifted the man by his skull and brought his free hand up, forcing it through the water and placing it against his stomach. Then he fired off a pair of force palm jutsu. Then again. Then again. And again. Over and over in a rapid fire he unleashed his own original and crate jutsu in a barrage. The water armor dissipated by the second time. He didn't care. He wanted his goddamn pound of flesh for him, forcing him to go this fucking far. When he finally stopped and dropped the corpse of the former Jonin to the ground, the face was entirely gone, and there was a gaping hole ripped straight through the stomach to the other side. In the end, the man had become nothing more than a bloody pulped piece of meat. Pho. Daki spat on the corpse. He would have loved to beat the man around a little more, take out his frustration and rage on him. But, he wasn't consumed by the desire enough to not notice the way his strength and chakra, despite peaking so massively, begun to rapidly dwindle as the seconds went by. Before he lost the boost to his chakra, and the proper feeling swept through him again, Daki brought his hands together into a single modified seal, pure bright green chakra erupting from his hands. Daki took the chance to mend all of his injuries, right up until his vision went dark, and his legs buckled beneath him. He never hit the ground, a hand caught him before he did. "Ma, you're a real scary kid, huh?" A familiar, annoying voice drawled. "I fucking hate you." Daki cursed him, then he faded into unconsciousness. This time, when consciousness returned to Daki, it was a gentle thing, like he just woke up from a really good nap. And he felt good. Awake almost instantly, as soon as he opened his eyes. He pushed himself up, and realized he was actually in a bed. A pretty nice bed actually, way better than the one in his shitty apartment. He looked around, noting he was in a rather barren-looking room, with a particular type of wooden walling and flooring. Looking exactly like the wood made to build the houses in the waterfall village. Daki smirked, feeling a surge of pride flow through him as he remembered the state he left that prick Suion in. Giving himself a mental pat on the back, he leaned back against the comfortable pillow that he had been laying on and just basked in the feeling of victory now that he was awake to enjoy. "Oh yeah, been a while since I checked my stats," he mused, idly calling up his status. He blinked stupidly at what was reflected back at him. That didn't make sense. Not at all. Name, Daikiyuria. Age, 13. Chakra capacity, 39,600/39,600, Genin. Strength, 86.4/510. Endurance, 128.4/510. Durability, 86.4/510. Agility, 86.4/510. Taijutsu, 155/500. Ninjutsu, 174/500. Genjutsu, 10/500. Bukajutsu, 46/500. Chakra control, 182/500. Chakra affinities. Lightning, adept, you have stepped onto the path of roaring thunder. Fuinjutsu, adept, you are no longer a mere amateur. What the utter shit. His chakra capacity, it had more than doubled since he last saw it. Not only that, but all of his physical abilities, they had risen drastically. But beyond even that, his physical stats. The cap on them had been 500 before, but now, it was 510. That didn't seem like a big gap. But he'd noticed something before. Going by his stat numbers, he should only be roughly 4 times as strong as he was right now, as he was when he first woke up with this status system. But that was wrong. By his estimates, he was actually double that amount stronger and definitely that amount faster. The higher his stats rose, the harder it became to make them rise, yet at the same time, each single stat pot seemed to bit by bit become worth more than the one before it. 30 wasn't half as strong as 60 in these numbers, not even close. He actually couldn't tell how big the gaps were, it was really hard to measure. The difference between 500 and 510 was probably quite massive when applying that logic. Is it because of the hero water? He wondered, dismissing the status screen and thinking. Thinking on it, this was probably a good thing. Considering the amount of time he'd need to make these kind of gains, weeks, more even. For a paltry 10 years off of his life. Yes, Daiki decided, this well worth it. After all, making up for 10 years of life force. That would be easy. After all, he was planning on becoming a Jinchu Yuriki. And beyond that, there was a certain little ferret with a certain little traveling clan from another continent roaming the elemental nations. And in that ferret, there was a certain stone that he could easily get his hands on. He only needed a fragment of it even and could give the rest back to the ferret, and not only would it boost all of his abilities and chakra, it would also massively increase his lifespan. Guess I gotta look into finding the Stone of Jelal, he mused. He should probably start with the Land of Rivers. Everything fucking else was there after all. Shifting the covers laying neatly across his body off, Daiki sat up fully and pushed himself up out of the bed. Honestly, he was feeling pretty damn energized right now, he was almost itching to burn off energy now that he'd sorted his thoughts out. He was eager to get back to the grind. And something else now plagued him, as he remembered back to that fight. He was more or less a gnat compared to Suion, as expected of a rookie Genin fighting a Jonin. Yet, with just a sip of the hero's water, he'd absolutely crushed the man easily, even with such an astounding technique as that water armor of his. The man was probably on, or at least approaching the level of an elite Jonin, definitely at least bordering on the ability of an A-rank Shinobi. Daiki clenched his hands, a wide grin spread across his. He drifted back to the feeling of complete power, the pure confidence and high he felt. It was like nothing he'd ever experienced before. He wanted it. He wanted to reach that level, become that strong, and then grind even further upwards and ascend even further beyond. He knew after all, that the level of strength he'd gained from there, was but a pittance compared to the kind of strength the likes of Madara and Hashirama had. Hell, he bet it didn't even come close to comparing to the likes of the Reikage and the like. Yeah, that's it, I'll get there. As he lifted his hand into the air and began to make a vow to grow that strong. Only for the door to swing open and Fu to step in, and pause, blinking her orange eyes owlishly. Hey, you're awake again, Daki. The mint-haired Jinchuriki beamed, then her eyes drifted down from his face, to his crotch and her cheeks flushed a bit red. And it was then Daki realized he was completely naked. I blame Kakashi, he growled mentally. For a moment, they just stared. Daki at the mint-haired Jinchuriki and Fu, eyeing up his Serpent King Manda. Sure, the size difference in the naming sense was a bit off and didn't fit, but hey, Manda was the biggest serpentine beast he could think of right now, even if he was too minuscule to truly describe his manly girth. Daki sighed, take a picture, it'll last longer. He deadpanned. Fu yoinked her gaze from his crotch and shrugged. I don't have a camera, she replied, can I borrow yours? I don't have one either. Daki found himself retorting. Maybe Shibuki. She tapped her chin and mused. She sure wasn't shy at all, huh? Shaking his head, Daki ignored his state of undress, and crossed his arms. So, what happened after I passed out? He asked. Fu clicked her tongue. Don't know, I didn't wake up until like an hour after you had apparently beaten that dickhead, she pouted. I can't believe I got taken out so easily, then missed Shibuki kicking ass and then you finishing him off, must have been an amazing show. Her shoulders slumped. You know, it's been a long time since Shibuki was like that. He used to be way cooler than he is now. She shook her head, before perking up. Anyway, your friends have already recovered and left, but your sensei has stuck around to wait for you to wake up. Daki gave her an odd look. Shibuki, cool. Well, Daki supposed he was kind of cool yesterday when he finally manned up, but, beyond that, he couldn't picture the man as cool at all. And what was that about his sensei? I don't have a sensei, Daki pointed out. Actually, how long have I been out? Fu shrugged. Well, the scarecrow-looking grey-haired Jonin guy is waiting for you at Shibuki's place, she corrected herself, and, about a day I guess. Not that long considering the beating you took and the fact you drank the hero's water. Actually, how are you feeling? She was a bit of a motormouth, wasn't she? But, Kakashi stuck around. That didn't sound like him. Daki flexed his rippling biceps from his crossed arms and gave her a smirk. I feel good, great even, he said, how about you? In reply, Fu pumped her fist up. I'm fine, I didn't take anywhere near as big a beating as you did, and I recover quick anyway, one of the benefits of being a Jinchuriki, right? Good to hear, Daki nodded, before a thought occurred. Actually, how is that treating you here? Like, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki is treated like crap back in my village. Fu blinked, before her bright smile turned a little shaky. I mean, it's not that bad, you know. Shibuki always looked out for me growing up, before his dad died at least, and he turned out the way he did, and well, I'm not really close to anyone else. They are wary of me, but they don't exactly treat me bad or anything. She didn't even hesitate to explain to him, had he ended himself to her that much already? Or, was it more likely she just had no filter? Wait, you know the Kyuubi Jinchuriki? She suddenly asked, eyes widening as she caught on to that fact. Yeah, and so do you, Daki pointed out, or, probably. You know the blonde kid, Naruto. He's got the Kyuubi. Eh? Fu gaped. I talked to him a bit yesterday before he left, though he was more interested in the pink-haired girl. I had no idea. Ah, that sucks. I've never talked to another Jinchuriki before. Oh wait, shit, wasn't it supposed to be an S-class secret or something like that? Fuck. Well, not like anybody had told him it was an S-class secret, he only knew from meta-knowledge, so not like he could be blamed for it. You should keep that to yourself, mind you, Daki tacked on, just in case. It's supposed to be some sort of secret, despite how badly it's hidden, so if you talk about it you might get my head chopped off. Fu blinked, before grinning, don't worry about it. I won't tell anybody, I promise. I'm just glad I got to meet another container like me. She waved him off. It's almost like being proper comrades in a way. Close to being friends. I don't really have any friends, so it's nice to know. Oh, right. Daki had to hold back a grimace. From what he remembered, wasn't Fu so lonely in canon, without any friends, that she actually allowed the Akatsuki to take her because she felt no joy in life? Suddenly, he could quite easily picture this girl, floating in a shroud of chakra in a dark cave, surrounded by 9 shadowy figures as they extracted the beast from within her out, leaving her in a state of agony for days on end, before they finished and she finally died, her corpse, treated like trash, just left to drop to the ground and left to rot. His hand gripped his bicep and tightened, almost hard enough to draw blood. Aren't we friends? Daki found himself saying on instinct. Fu's eyes widened. We're friends. She replied slowly, a forlorn something in her voice that tugged at his heartstrings. Fuck, he was such a sap. We hit it off, didn't we? You saved my life and then we fought side by side as well. Daki shrugged. As far as I'm concerned, I think that's enough to start off a friendship between us. A second later he had his arms full of a petite, toned kunoichi as she slammed into him, arms wrapping around him, and he heard a brief sniffle, before it was drowned out by her voice in his ear, friends, huh? That's great. I've never had a friend before. She cheered. Yes, though he should probably point out, friends didn't quite hug each other while one was completely nude, especially not when one was an exotically cute girl. Not unless they were friends with benefits, or the friends beyond friends, the relationship kind. But, Fu wouldn't exactly understand that type of things right now, he didn't think. My dick is pressing against her stomach. Daki mused. His completely naked dick was pressed against her soft, yet toned and equally nude belly. It took all of the iron willpower he'd formed through throwing himself into the grind for months on end, to stop his Serpent King Manda from entering Serpent King Manda, Sage Mode. Haruichi Cave was off limits for now. It took him a not inconsiderable amount of time to extract himself from Fu's hug. And thankfully, it turned out his clothes were just sitting in a corner of the room. In a haphazard pile. Kakashi was such a cunt sometimes. He wasted no time on pulling his clothing back on. While he wasn't really ashamed at all to be naked, it was hard to keep from going full bonerific sometimes, so better safe than sorry. He didn't want to give Fu the wrong idea. You know what sucks? Fu mused as he finished dressing, sitting on the bed he'd awoken in and kicking her feet back and forth. He made an effort not to stare at her lovely, toned legs. It was hard. Fu had all the looks of an Arabian girl, and a pair of hips that just did not quit. She would look amazing in a belly dancer outfit. A lot of things. Daki griped, sitting beside her now that he was done. She chuckled, well yeah, she nodded, but, hear me out here. You're my first friend, and I won't be able to see you much, especially since you need to leave soon cause you're on a mission. It's not like we can't visit each other, he pointed out in return. Our villages are allied, so you can come to Konoha whenever, and I don't think Shibuki will mind at this point if I pop over here to visit you either, since I already know the entrance of the place. Fu sighed, collapsed back onto her back on the bed. If only, I'm not actually allowed to leave the village, being a Jinchuriki and all, she pouted, so, it'll have to be you visiting me alone, and well, you've got your own training to do as a shinobi and missions and stuff to do, you know. Well, exuberant she might be, but she clearly wasn't an idiot. He didn't actually have a lot of time between training and missions. Well, there's a lot of things I want to take care of outside my village, Daki mused. I can always pop by and visit when I'm doing that, and the Chunin exams are in just 2 months. Maybe you can come over to Konoha then and we can hang out. She perked up a bit. Dunno about the Chunin exams, I asked to go to the last ones, but Shibuki wouldn't let me. She shrugged, but grinned, but the other stuff sounds cool, hopefully you'll have some fun stories to tell me. Daki was about to reply, when she suddenly clapped her hands, eyes widening. Oh, I know. Fu grinned widely at him. I can teach you the wave transmission jutsu. And we can talk from really far away with it. Though, I dunno if you'll have enough chakra for it considering how much distance there is between our villages. Wait, what? You're going to teach me such a useful sounding jutsu, just so we can talk over long distances? Daki blinked slowly. Yup. Fu flashed him a thumbs up. But like I said, you might not have enough chakra to use it much, like, not even a Jonin would be able to supply enough chakra to hold a full-on conversation considering how far away Konoha is from here. Jonin tier chakra ha. And not even manage a full conversation. Quite the chakra guzzler, wasn't it? Not to mention, his chakra capacity had outright doubled and was still in the Chunin range. If there wasn't elite Chunin tier, like there was for Genin, then he was a ways off from reaching Jonin tier. Let me worry about that. Daki waved off her worries, he had options after all, then paused as he remembered something. Actually, there's a way you can help me out on that front. Fu tilted her head. Sure, whatever you need. She agreed instantly. He should probably caution her after this though. To make sure she doesn't just give a random stranger whatever they want from her just because they said they'd be her friend. Can you show me your seal? He asked, getting straight to the point. Fu's exotic orange eyes looked at him strangely, before she shrugged. Sure, I don't mind. She replied, before promptly turning around so her back was facing him, and pulling her short crop top and mesh up at the front, making it right up and expose her slender back to him. Before he could get stuck ogling the suddenly half-naked older girl, her back shimmered for a moment, chakra palpably running over her skin, and huge black blocks of ink faded into existence. Each one was at a corner of her back, and all 4 of them perfectly lined up perpendicularly leading to the middle of her back. Banishing any of the horny within himself, Daki focused only on the grind and raised his hand, placing his palm in the middle of the seal and running his chakra through it. As he did, chains of sealing characters spread out from the 4 ink blocks, forming into a spider web-like pattern. A 4-symbol seal, ha! Daki mused. This was far higher quality than he thought it was going to be. But, he could tell at just a glance, this was no master's work, so it probably didn't measure up to the 4-symbol seal Kushina had, and definitely not the 8-symbol seal made by overlaying 2 4-symbol seals over each other that Naruto had, even if he hadn't had the chance to examine them. He could tell that right off the bat, because, even as low-tier a seal user as he was, he could actually understand quite a bit of this seal matrix. Right, gimme a minute. Deki said, and held his hand out, summoning a blank scroll and some ink from his Dimension 4 seal. Which felt particularly empty right now. My weapons got destroyed by Sasuke and Fu's jutsu, he remembered with annoyance, before dismissing the thought and focusing on copying down the seal on Fu's back. After he copied down the seal and sealed the copy in his Dimension 4 seal, Fu was eager to teach him her jutsu. It was a jutsu that spread out a wave of chakra, almost like sonar waves, on a specific frequency decided on by the users and carried the inner thoughts of the user to their target. All in all, it was basically a jutsu used for talking within your head with another. A very useful tool for a ninja really, when it came to not making any sounds and not letting others overhear your plans. And, from the looks of it, it actually wasn't all that complicated. And according to Fu, he should be able to get it down within a few days of training. When he was done and knew what he had to do to finish learning the technique though, Deki felt guilty. She gave him a really useful jutsu just to talk with him, and didn't mind at all when it came to showing her seal to him. She didn't know just how much her doing so contributed to his overall goals either. She had sped up his plans immensely. He couldn't leave her without giving her something in return. So he taught her a jutsu of his own in return. Oh wow. The second Fu that had been summoned through a puff of smoke, a half an hour later grinned, both her and the original eagerly looking each other over. This jutsu is so cool. The twin girls exclaimed, turning to grin at him. Best idea ever. Deki decided then as he bore witness to his spontaneous decision. Especially since both Fus quickly latched onto his sides and hugged him tightly. They were very touchy-feely and didn't mind at all hugging him. It was hard to be jealous of how easily she learned the technique compared to him, when there were benefits like this. This is so great. Fu beamed at him. Yeah, you said this jutsu can transfer memories, right? Her clone on his other side nodded eagerly in agreement. With this, clones like me can head outside of the village and explore and have fun, then send the memories back to the original. You're the best, Deki. He supposed they could be used that way as well. Well, happy to help out a friend. He grinned back at them both. Just then, there was a knock on the door, before it swung up, and a familiar Cyclops-faced Jonin entered the room. He paused, looking over the two Fus, before raising an eyebrow at Deki. Sorry, was I interrupting something? He then wiggled said eyebrow at the teen. Oh, it's you. Deki's good mood evaporated and his gaze turned dry. Oh, did it suddenly get colder in here? Kakashi hummed, the amusement in his eye plain as day. Anyway, sorry to interrupt your flirting with your new little friend, but now that I see you're awake, Shibuki wants to talk to you before we leave. He explained, before looking down at the book in his hand, as he always did. We weren't flirting, Fu protested, before pausing and looking at Deki, were we? Not really, Deki responded idly, just ignore Sakashi, he's just projecting because he's like a 30-year-old virgin. Kakashi looked up from his book boredly. Did you say something? I couldn't tell, I'm just so strong, you see that sometimes the voices of the incredibly weak just don't register. Deki resisted the urge to toss a kunai at the man. It was a close thing though. Mostly because he didn't really have any left, granted. As tempting as it was, to be a petty little shit and blow Kakashi off, Daki knew he couldn't act so petulant in another village and make Konoha look bad. So, he reluctantly did as the man said and left the house he had been sleeping off his exhaustion from yesterday in and was directed to another, larger home, near enough a mansion in comparison to the rest of the homes throughout the village. Fu led him through, while Kakashi stayed outside, his new friend bringing him through the home to an office space, guarded by 2 shinobi. They both eyed Fu and Daki for a moment, before ignoring them. Fu ignored them right back and promptly kicked open the door, slamming it into the wall with a loud bang. "Hey Shibuki!" The girl greeted loudly. Snorting, Daki followed her inside. He found Shibuki sitting behind a large oak desk, the man looking up from a large scroll, a bunch more of them spread about his desk, and piles of documents. Guess even in a minor village the paperwork is killer. Daki mused, and made a vow to never become Hokage. Shibuki sighed. "Fu, how many times have I asked you not to just barge in?" he asked, laying the scroll down. "Dunno, never counted." She shrugged. He sighed once more, before looking at Daki. "Thanks for coming to see me before you left," he started, before promptly bowing his head to Daki, in a rather shocking move that actually surprised the boy. "I wanted to thank you personally for your help. If not for you and your friend's kindness and bravery, Waterfall would have fallen yesterday. You in particular went above and beyond, suffering many debilitating injuries from what Fu tells me and then even going on to use the hero water yourself. Whether you knew or not, the fact remains, you gave up at least a decade of your life force to help us, so please accept my gratitude." It's fine, we're allies." Daki trailed off, rather shocked and unable to formulate any other reply. Where the hell had the cocky, haughty coward from yesterday went to? Even the way he spoke, softer, yet at the same time, it carried a much heavier weight than it did yesterday. It was the voice of a man, and not a cowardly little boy. It was like he was looking at a completely different person. "Thank you for your understanding." Shibuki lifted his head and smiled at him. "Still, I've made sure you won't walk away from here empty-handed for your efforts." He reached into his top and procured 2 scrolls. One, a standard sealing scroll, while the other, was around double the size and on the rim, depicted the image of a large black fish. Shibuki placed both scrolls on his desk. "This sealing scroll contains the bounty we placed on my former teacher, 1 million ryo in total," he explained, before pointing to the fish-bearing scroll. This is something that was a gift to Suion by my father. Due to him being the strongest shinobi in the village beyond my father, it is one of 3 contract scrolls passed down in my family, for the fish clan. This specific scroll is linked to Reinen Maru, one of the boss summons and the personal summon of Suion. We retrieved the scroll from his body. As a gift, I want you to have it." "Ha! Well, wasn't that something? Reinen Maru." Fu spoke up before he could, tapping her chin in thought. "Isn't that one just like your summon? Can't it transform into a huge dragon?" "Yes, all the fish bosses are capable of using the dragon transformation technique." Shibuki nodded. "Reinen Maru is tied for the strongest of the clan with my own summon, perhaps even stronger nowadays. Though, he is known for his particularly aggressive personality, he may just attack you if summoned, especially considering you killed Suion. 1 million ryo and a fish that could turn into a dragon. Neat." He didn't really need a summoning contract though, he already had one. And he didn't know if signing it would cause issues with the Chameleon clan. "You didn't happen to find the instructions for that water armor jutsu of his, did you?" He'd happily take that instead. A dragon summon, technically, sounded fucking cool as shit, and if it could fly, that would be hella useful, and as a fish originally, it probably had access to water jutsu that would pair well with his lightning jutsu. But that water armor would be a safer bet. Because if it turned out the chameleons weren't cool with him signing another contract, he wasn't going to, so it would be useless to him. Better something he could for sure get use out of himself. Shibuki snorted. If only the leader of Waterfall shook his head, it was quite the jutsu, wasn't it? If I could spread that jutsu through the village, we'd definitely be able to grow stronger overall, but, sadly, no. Knowing my teacher, selfish as he was, he'd probably have destroyed anything remotely instructional on the technique once he learned it himself. Well, that sucked. Still, it wasn't like what he got was a bad haul or anything. He wondered idly for a moment, if this Rainimru would be able to teach that dragon transformation technique to Shirorai. He had mentioned he was born of a union between the Snake Clan and the Chameleons. Specifically, his father was actually Manda, in an attempt to breed an actual dragon. Granted, to do that, he would need to summon Shirorai, and he hadn't really gotten around to trying that out yet. He may have enough chakra to do so, but he couldn't exactly do that in another village, now could he? Daiki thought of the best option to go with here. His eyes flickered briefly to the girl by his side. That may be a better option actually. If Fu had a boss summon on her own side, she would have a lot more options if Akatsuki ever came calling. And he doubted Fu would begrudge him signing it later if things worked out with the chameleons on that front anyway. So, I can do what I want with this then? Daiki asked, picking the fish contract scroll up. It's yours to do as you please with. Shibuki confirmed. All right then, Daiki nodded, then turned around and held the scroll out to Fu. Here, you have it, Fu. Ah. Shibuki trailed off in shock. Really? Fu's eyes widened with excitement. Yeah, I already have a summon contract of my own and I don't know if they'll accept me having another clan's contract as well, he shrugged, before smiling at her. Plus, this Rainimru guy sounds tough, and I'd feel better knowing you have strong backup like that. Yahoo! Fu accepted the scroll and jumped up and down excitedly. I always wanted a summon of my own. She then slammed into his side again, wrapping him in a massive hug. Wait. Shibuki spluttered, standing up abruptly, so fast his chair tipped over and hit the ground with a clatter. Are you sure about this? Rainimru isn't a weak summon, Daiki-san. His scales are so hard normal weaponry can't pierce him. He's faster than Suion was and has many water-style techniques. On top of that, upon assuming his dragon form, he can use fire-style techniques as well. Rainimru really was impressive, huh? Really living up to that boss summon title. Yeah, I'm sure of it, Daiki nodded, though, I hope you don't mind me coming back for a visit now and then to see Fu. Shibuki shook his head and sighed, picking up his chair and sitting back down. Feel free, honestly, if it wasn't due to her status, I'd tell her to go with you and vacation in Konoha, keep her out of my hair for a while, he replied dryly. Sadly, it's not quite that simple. I will barely keep to testing our borders as is, simply because it is known she is always stationed here and they fear the wrath of the Nanabi, if they heard she was staying in Konoha now, especially with how much they hate your village, they'd get paranoid and much more aggressive. Daiki growled at the mention of them. Fucking rock humpers, he spat in disgust, they never learn. Okay, so maybe he had a grudge against Iwa for the way two fucking grown Jonin had targeted him, a Miruki Genin, and murdered him just because he was from the leaf. Surprisingly, Shibuki nodded in agreement. Yeah, I'll have to shake the hand of the Yondaime Hokage when the day comes that I die, he half smirked at the thought. The only good Iwa ninja is a dead one as far as I'm concerned. Oh yeah, didn't Shibuki's father die because he needed to use the hero water to hold off Onaki? Honestly, suddenly Shibuki seemed much more likable today. He left Shibuki's office not long later, Song-fu. It seemed he wanted to take the time to explain to her that the summoning technique, especially one linked to Rainimaru, was not a toy and she had to be careful with it. Fu had already half-tuned him out as soon as he started, instead focusing on hugging the ever-loving daylights out of Daiki and telling him to come back and visit soon and winking at him while wishing him luck on increasing his chakra capacity. Shibuki had sputtered and went bright red at her words. He thought it was innuendo apparently, and didn't coin on to the real meaning behind her words at all. So, ready to go. He found Kakashi leaning on the wall of the mansion beside the door. Are you a clone or the real one? Daiki asked instead. Not a clone, Kakashi shrugged. I left a few clones to keep an eye on you while I escorted my team back, then rushed back once they were back in the village. Daiki shrugged and walked on, the older Shinobi pushing off the mansion and quickly catching up and walking beside him in a few strides. I've got another question. He asked. I may have the answer. Kakashi didn't even look up from his book. If you were around, the teen began, narrowing his eyes at the man by his side. Why did you let that guy kick the shit out of us? You could have taken care of him at any point, couldn't you? Actions have consequences, Kakashi shrugged, actually looking up from his book to stare at Daiki seriously. You and those 3 other idiot chibis jumped right into a mission you were never given. You aren't samurai, it isn't your job to defend the innocent, you're a shinobi. The man stopped walking, forcing Daiki to do the same. You were never in any real danger. The second he went for a full-on killing blow, I would have ripped his head off before he even knew what happened, Kakashi continued, directing his full attention to Daiki, and the boy felt something akin to a pressure force down upon his shoulders, rooting him to the spot. But what if I wasn't here? Being a Jonin sensei isn't about holding your hands. You should be trusted to make your way back to the village. If I wasn't here, and you didn't have that water as a crutch, all of you would have died for your pure ignorance of the situation and utter arrogance in your own ability. Daiki found he couldn't utter a word to refute the Sharingan wielder. This is why I told the Hokage I didn't want to bring my team with me, Kakashi sighed, running a hand through his hair and looking away from Daiki. I knew exactly that Naruto and Sasuke couldn't be trusted to act as they should have. I wasn't sure about you and I knew Sakura would tag along with whatever Sasuke decided. He outright grumbled. Daiki found himself releasing a huge breath he hadn't known he'd been holding when the man looked away, tch. It grated him, that every single word the man said, struck true. They had been arrogant. He'd been especially arrogant because of his own knowledge. He thought after fighting those first rain scrubs, that they could handle it, even knowing there was a Jonin-class enemy running the show. Clearly, he needed to grind more than just his muscle and chakra power. Well, whatever, Kakashi shrugged his shoulders, treat this as a learning experience. I will. Daiki promised. He clearly didn't have the strength yet to act as he pleased. They resumed walking, and not long later arrived at the shore of the lake, where to Daiki's slight surprise, a familiar figure was waiting. A small, cute little girl, who positively lit up when she saw them. Daiki-ni. Shitsuku shouted and quickly rushed over to him. Slamming into his stomach and wrapping her thin arms around his waist. You're okay, I'm so glad. Daiki was touched by her worry for him. I'm fine, he pat her on the head and assured her, besides I told you didn't I? That I'd kick all those guys' asses. Shitsuku nodded against his stomach, you were super cool. Damn right he was. He kneeled down after a moment when she pulled back and smiled at her. It's time for me to head back home, but I'll come back and visit sometime, he promised her. So until then, you be a good girl and look after your mom, okay? I will. She nodded, then surprised him by leaning forward and kissing him on the cheek. I love you, Genin, she declared, as she bid him goodbye. She ran off a moment later, waving him goodbye as she went, to which he returned as he stood up, right up until she disappeared behind a few houses. My, aren't you quite the ladies' man? Kakashi giggled. I wonder how the cute little Hyuga heiress will feel about you attracting Fu and little Shitsuku. Deki rolled his eyes. Stuff it up your ass, he retorted. Not my kink, kid, Kakashi shrugged. Oh, by the way, here. Suddenly, there was a scroll in his hand and he tossed it at him. Deki caught it and raised his eyebrow at the man. And this is? He asked. It was a sealing scroll, he could tell that much, but not what was in it. Mission pay, for a B rank, divided 4 ways between you, Sasuke, Naruto and Sakura, he explained. Oh, and the bounty for that Rain Kunoichi you killed and a little extra I found on her body that I'm sure you'll like. It better not be her underwear. Deki deadpanned. Kakashi scoffed, as if a kid like you could appreciate the underwear of a mature, sexy lady. I don't want to hear that from an obvious virgin who turned to smut cause he can't pull a girl. Deki shot back. And that was how the return trip went back to Konoha. Quite the spiral of events, I see. The Sundame mused, leaning back in his chair. I'm beginning to think my team are cursed, to be honest, Kakashi shrugged. Our missions tend to spiral like this a lot, don't they? It's only been twice. Sarutobi deadpanned at the younger man. That's practically a dozen, Kakashi shrugged, but yes, you don't need to worry about the girl, she seems perfectly stable, honestly, it's a wonder she's so upbeat with her situation. And the seal? The older man pressed. Seems to be holding strong, the copy ninja replied, though, you'd be better asking Deki, seems he has an interest in sealing quite a bit. He caught on that she was a Jinchuriki at some point during the mission and got her to show him her seal. From what I gather, he copied it down to study. Sarutobi chortled, shaking his head in amusement. He sounds like another promising young man I once knew, he said. The similarities are quite astounding, really. The innate talent they both have with the sealing arts, coming to the rescue of a female Jinchuriki, even studying their seals. I suppose he resembles Minato-sensei a bit, Kakashi nodded in agreement, though the attitude is all wrong. He's like some weird horrifying cross of Minato-sensei, Jiraiya-sama and Guy. Honestly, it sounded like some form of horrifying monster to Kakashi. He wondered how he was at writing smut. The chortle turned into a full-bellied laugh at the comparison. Hopefully though, they learn a bit from this, Kakashi sighed, scratching the back of his head. It won't be long now before they start doing missions without me. They need to understand just how wrong things can go if you don't consider things properly. They are young still, but some perspective is always good to have, the Hokage pointed out. Still, it's not like you don't approve of what they did in the end. Kakashi didn't refute the older man's words, because he was right. He wouldn't have written down the instructions for that lightning jutsu for the kid and pretended he looted it from that chick's body otherwise. But, he stood by his decision in the end to let things play out as they did. Tough love like this was better than them dying. At least here, he could give them that experience with an opponent in a controlled environment, where he could have ended things in an instant if they got truly dangerous. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel for more such videos. Tell me your recommendation in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching.